She walked into the most exclusive restaurant in Chicago, believing, for the first time in years, that she deserved to be there. She walked out alone, humiliated in front of a room full of strangers by the man who had begged her to come. But the night wasn't over, because the most dangerous man in the city saw everything, and he didn't look away. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit like, follow, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dress was emerald green. Savannah Reed had bought it 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday afternoon when the October light was doing something particularly cruel to the windows of the boutique on Wabash Avenue, catching every reflection at an angle that made her want to put the dress back on the rack and walk out without looking at the price tag or at herself. She had almost done exactly that. Her hand had gone back to the hanger twice, but the woman running the boutique, a small Polish woman in her 60s with reading glasses perpetually balanced on the end of her nose, had looked at Savannah from across the room with an expression that wasn't pity and wasn't flattery, and said, very plainly, "That color was made for someone with your complexion. It would be a waste on anyone else." Savannah had bought the dress. She hadn't worn it since. It hung in the back of her closet behind a row of sensible blazers and dark cardigans. The armor she wore to the Chicago Historical Archive, where she spent most of her waking hours cataloging land deeds from the 1890s and cross-referencing probate records that nobody had touched in 40 years. She was good at her job. She was exceptional at her job, actually, though her supervisor, Marcus Elroy, had a habit of using words like thorough and reliable in her performance reviews rather than words like brilliant or indispensable, which is what she actually was. She knew it. She'd stopped waiting for him to figure it out sometime around her 3rd year there. Tonight she was wearing the dress. Bryce Calloway had called her the previous Thursday. His voice had the particular texture of someone who practiced sounding casual, smooth and unhurried in a way that didn't quite land because there was effort underneath it, the faint mechanical hum of performance. He was an investment executive at a firm called Meridian Capital on the 42nd floor of a glass tower on Michigan Avenue. They had been seeing each other for 6 weeks, which in Savannah's experience was long enough to start wondering if something was real and short enough to still be wrong about it. Etoile Noir, he had said. Saturday. I made a reservation. Etoile Noir was the kind of restaurant that didn't have prices on the menu they handed to guests who weren't paying. It had crystal chandeliers and leather booths, and a sommelier named Gerard who moved through the dining room like he was walking on something more expensive than floor. Savannah had walked past it 100 times. She had never been inside. She had started. 8 o'clock, Bryce said. Don't be late. The maitre d' is particular. She should have noticed the way he said it. The slight edge in don't be late. Not teasing, not warm, but directive. The way he had already moved past the question of whether she wanted to go and straight into logistics. She noticed it and filed it somewhere she didn't examine too closely. The way you step around a loose board in a floor you've walked across 1,000 times and eventually stop thinking about. She wore the dress. The cab let her out in front of Etoile Noir at 7:58 on a Saturday night in November, and the cold came off Lake Michigan like something with intention. Her coat was wool, charcoal gray, and she held it closed with one hand while the doorman, a tall man in his 40s who had the face of someone who had evaluated thousands of people walking through this particular door and learned to be courteous without being warm, pulled the handle and said, "Good evening, ma'am." Inside, the chandeliers were everything the photograph suggested. The light they threw was golden and dense, catching on stemware and cufflinks and the small diamonds and earrings at tables along the far wall. The room smelled of butter and aged leather and something floral that Savannah couldn't identify. Every table was occupied. The sound was low and layered, the particular murmur of people who were accustomed to expensive rooms and therefore didn't feel the need to fill them with noise. The maitre d' found Bryce Calloway's reservation without looking at the book. Table 9, near the center of the room, not in a corner, not tucked away. Bryce liked to be seen. He liked rooms to register his presence. Savannah understood this about him without having articulated it to herself. And as the maitre d' led her through the dining room, she felt the small private pleasure of the dress, doing exactly what the Polish woman in the boutique had promised it would do. She wasn't invisible. She was wearing something that demanded to be looked at, and she had spent long enough making herself small in rooms like this that the sensation had a specific weight to it. Bryce was already at the table. He rose when he saw her, which was good, and his eyes moved over her in that particular way, assessing rather than appreciating, which was not. But he kissed her cheek and pulled out her chair, and the waiter appeared instantly with menus and sparkling water, and for 20 minutes everything was exactly what she had told herself it might be. He talked about a deal his firm was closing in Singapore. She asked questions that demonstrated she had been listening the last time he mentioned it, 3 weeks ago at dinner at a Thai place in Lincoln Park. He seemed genuinely pleased that she remembered, or at least surprised, which in Savannah's experience with men of his particular type amounted to roughly the same thing. She was 2 sips into a glass of Burgundy when the collision happened. She heard them before she saw them. The specific cadence of men who worked together arriving somewhere together, the slight overlap of voices, the jangling self-consciousness of a group entering a room and knowing they're being watched. 3 men, all in their late 30s or early 40s, all wearing the specific variety of business casual that cost more than most people's formal wear. The one in front had the posture of someone who had played college lacrosse and never entirely let it go. Bryce's body changed before his face did. It was subtle, a slight stiffening in his shoulders, a fractional shift in his jaw. But Savannah had spent years developing the particular skill of reading people through physical microtelemetry, which was not unrelated to her ability to read historical documents for what they weren't saying. She caught it the moment it happened. "Calloway." The lacrosse one was grinning. "Didn't know you'd be here tonight." Bryce stood up. The movement was a little too fast. "Peterson, I didn't see you come in. Just got a table in the back. Client dinner." Peterson's eyes moved to Savannah with the particular quality of a man accustomed to categorizing women quickly. His gaze stayed a half-second too long and communicated something that required no translation. 2 of the 3 men with Peterson were looking at Savannah the same way. Not with cruelty, not yet. Just with the blank evaluative stare of people who had learned that rooms like this had a specific visual language, and that Savannah's presence in it required some interpretation. Bryce's face had done something Savannah had not seen it do before. It had gone careful, contained. The expression of a man managing information. "I should—" Bryce started. He stopped. He looked at Savannah. Then he looked at Peterson. Then he looked at Savannah again, and whatever calculation was happening behind his eyes resolved into something that made the back of her throat go cold. He stepped away from the table. Not far. Maybe 4 feet. But 4 feet in a room this size, at this moment, with these particular people watching, 4 feet was a declaration. "Colleagues of mine," he said, to no one in particular, his voice dropping below the ambient room noise so that only the people immediately proximate could hear. "I didn't realize they'd be here. I need to— Bryce?" Savannah's voice was quiet, even. He turned and looked at her. "Are you going to introduce me?" The pause lasted approximately 3 seconds. She counted them. In those 3 seconds, she watched his face cycle through something she recognized from her own mirror on the worst of her bad days. The particular calculus of a person deciding that comfort was more important than decency, that a moment of temporary awkwardness was worth more than the long, slow erosion of being the kind of person who made a different choice. He made the choice. "I can't do this," he said. His voice was low, controlled, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than if he had been cruel about it. "I can't. Savannah, I can't be seen with someone like you. Not here. Not with these people." The room didn't stop. The chandeliers didn't flicker. The sommelier was at a table near the window explaining something about a Burgundy from a small estate in the Côte de Nuit, and his voice was unhurried and precise, and the world was still turning at exactly the speed it had been turning 1 minute ago, before the sentence. "Someone like you." She had heard variations of this sentence her entire life. She had heard it in junior high from a girl named Brittany, who said it about her hair. She had heard it in college from a professor who said she was smart for her size, which was a version of the same sentence with the specific cowardice of academia built in. She had heard it from her mother's second husband, who said it about her laugh being too loud for the dinner table, and from a man she had dated for 4 months 2 years ago, who, when she confronted him about something, had said, "You know you can be a lot," which was also a version of it. She knew the sentence. She knew every variation and conjugation of it. She had built a life that did not require other people to approve of it, had built it deliberately and at some cost. And she had walked into this restaurant tonight in an emerald dress, actually believing, that the particular construction of herself she had spent 34 years assembling was sufficient. And it was. She knew it was. She would know it again in an hour, in a day, in a week. She would know it in the morning when she woke up, and it was still true. But right now, in this moment, with Bryce Calloway standing 4 feet away from the table and Peterson still watching and the chandelier light landing on her exactly the way the Polish woman had said it would, right now the sentence was moving through her like cold water through a cracked wall, finding every gap, filling every space. She did not cry. She would not do that here. She had a specific policy about tears in public restaurants established during an incident in 2019 that she did not permit herself to revisit. She picked up her wine glass, set it down, smoothed the front of the dress with both palms, a gesture she recognized as protective the moment she made it. "Okay," she said. One word. She'd used one word because she couldn't trust herself with more than one word, and also because one word was sufficient. It said everything and conceded nothing. It was the same word she used when an archivist at another institution tried to claim credit for her research, and she had chosen not to fight it in the moment because she was picking battles. It was the word she kept for situations that required her to be more composed than she felt, which was not the same as being more okay than she felt. Bryce nodded once, like a man completing a transaction, and turned to rejoin Peterson. He walked away. He actually walked away. She sat at table 9 in the center of étoile noir in an emerald dress, while the chandelier light fell on her from above, and every adjacent table in her peripheral vision had rearranged itself into a gallery of studied, polite non-attention. The particular performance of Chicago's upper dining class pretending they hadn't watched the whole thing. The sommelier had moved on. The waiter was somewhere else. The sparkling water in her glass had gone flat. Savannah put both hands flat on the table. The linen was very white and very stiff and very cold. She counted her breaths the way her therapist had taught her 4 years ago when she'd had a period of particular difficulty and had finally admitted she might need help managing herself. In for 4, out for 6. The tightness in her chest was specific and familiar. She knew its architecture. She could live inside it until it diminished. She was on the 3rd breath when someone sat down across from her. She looked up. The man was perhaps 40, or perhaps older. There was a quality to his stillness that made age imprecise, the way very old trees have a quality that transcends the specific number of their rings. He was wearing a dark suit that had been made for him, not selected off any rack, and his tie was the specific shade of charcoal that falls between gray and black and communicates that the person wearing it has stopped worrying about whether anyone else has an opinion about their choices. His hair was dark and cut close. His hands, folded lightly on the table, were the hands of someone who had used them for things that did not appear on any resume. But it was the eyes. Gray. Not a warm gray. Not the polite, ambiguous gray that passed for neutrality in most faces. These were the gray of Lake Michigan in January when the ice was forming along the edges, and the center was still open water, dark and current-bearing and entirely indifferent to whether you survived a fall into it. They were looking at her with an attention so complete and so direct that it made every other attention she'd been subject to tonight, Peterson's evaluative slide, the adjacent table's careful avoidance, feel like peripheral blur. No one had ever looked at her quite like that. Not with wanting, not with that particular variety of appetite that men in rooms like this occasionally deployed, the look that was really just acquisition in a dinner jacket. This was something different. This was the look of a man cataloging something he considered significant. "That seat is taken," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "It was," the man said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't need rooms to be quiet before it spoke because it was simply accustomed to being heard. "It isn't anymore." Savannah looked at him, then at the direction Bryce had gone, then back. "I don't know you." "No," he agreed. "You don't." He didn't move to introduce himself. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't produce a business card or perform any of the social rituals that men in his tax bracket deployed in situations like this one. He simply sat there, in the chair that Bryce Calloway had vacated approximately 4 minutes ago, with the specific ease of a man who had never once in his life sat somewhere he hadn't decided to sit. "His loss," he said. quietly. My treasure. The words landed differently than she expected. Not as a line. She had spent enough time around men who delivered lines to recognize the cadence of a line, the slight performance of something rehearsed. This was not that. It was too direct for that. Too plain. It had the quality of an observation rather than an approach. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm not having a great night, she said finally. I can see that. I'm not interested in... She stopped, reformulated. I'm not in the market for whoever you are. I'm not selling anything, he said. Men who sit down uninvited at other people's tables usually are. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, not reaching his eyes, but the suggestion of one at the corners of his mouth. True, he said. Most men. Savannah looked at him again. Really looked. There was something about him that the room knew. She could feel it in the periphery, in the slight recalibration of the nearby tables that she'd caught in the last 30 seconds without quite identifying its source. The waiter who had been absent since Bryce's departure had reappeared and was hovering at a respectful distance that was slightly more respectful than it had been when it was just her. The maitre d' had done a small, almost imperceptible pivot from his station near the door. Who are you? She asked. He told her his name. She didn't know it. She spent her days in the company of the 19th century and the dust of municipal records and the particular silence of an archive that very few living people entered, and the networks of power that operated in the living city were not her professional terrain. But she watched the name move through the room the way a stone moves through still water, the ripple reaching the adjacent tables, reaching the sommelier, reaching the maitre d', reaching the group of men near the back where Bryce Calloway was having a drink with his colleagues and had presumably forgotten she existed. Bryce had not forgotten. She could tell by the specific quality of his stillness, which had gone rigid in a way that was different from the deliberate composure he'd been maintaining. He was looking at the man across from her. He was looking and then very carefully not looking, which was its own kind of looking. Damien Voss, she repeated, trying the name out, seeing what it weighed. Yes. Should I know that name? Probably not, he said. In your field, I imagine, the people worth knowing have been dead for 100 years. It was the last thing she expected him to say. She blinked. You know what I do? I know who you are. He said it without apology, without the performance of embarrassment that people sometimes deployed when admitting they'd researched someone. Just a fact, offered plainly. Savannah Reed, head archivist for the Chicago Municipal Historical Collection, specialist in land records and probate documentation from the post-fire Reconstruction era. You published a paper 4 years ago on forged land deeds in the 1893 redevelopment, and it upset several people whose families had benefited from those forgeries. She stared at him. How do you know about that paper? It was very good. That is not an answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. The waiter materialized. Damien Voss ordered something in an undertone that she didn't catch, and the waiter disappeared again immediately. She realized she was sitting forward slightly, her posture having changed without her consciously directing it. She sat back, picked up her wine glass. The burgundy was still there, still half full. I'm not going to pretend that wasn't humiliating, she said. Not about the research conversation, about Bryce, about the 4 feet of deliberate distance and the sentence. She said it because she refused to sit across from this man and perform the pretense that she was fine, that nothing had happened, that the last 20 minutes hadn't occurred. She was fine, she would be fine, but she wasn't going to lie about the trajectory. Damien Voss looked at her. Why would you pretend that? Most people would expect me to. I don't have expectations of what you should be doing right now, he said. I sat down because I wanted to sit down. You can ignore me if you'd prefer. That's an unusual offer. I'm an unusual person. She looked at him for a beat. Then, despite everything, despite the flush still in her face, the sentence still moving through her chest like cold water, the fact that she was still sitting in the restaurant where she had been publicly dismissed by a man she had worn an emerald dress for, she felt something loosen slightly. Not trust, not warmth, but the particular unwinding of a specific kind of tension. The tension of performing composure for an audience that required it. This man did not seem to require it. He looked at her like her composure was her own business. Tell me why you're really sitting here, she said. I told you. That was a line. I told you it wasn't. Men don't just... She stopped. Men who look like you don't sit down at a stranger's table and say things like that without a reason. I had a reason, he said. The reason was that a man who didn't deserve to be in this room stood up and walked away from a woman who did. And the injustice of that was... He paused. The pause was not theatrical. It had the quality of someone being precise. Irritating. Irritating. Yes. You were irritated on my behalf. I was irritated by poor judgment, he said, which is a professional hazard. She looked at him steadily. What is your profession, Mr. Voss? The pause again. Careful. I manage assets, he said. And interests. That's deliberately vague. Yes, she should have gotten up. She had told herself on the cab ride over that if the evening went badly, she would treat herself to a bowl of ramen at the place on Division Street that stayed open until midnight, and she would watch something forgettable on her laptop, and she would allow herself exactly 45 minutes of feeling bad about it before redirecting. That was the plan. The plan was still available. She didn't get up. She stayed because the man across from her was not performing anything for her. He was not trying to fix what Bryce had broken, not attempting to repackage the evening into something she would walk away feeling okay about. He was simply sitting there with those January lake eyes and that particular stillness, and she had the distinct, unusual sense that he had no interest in managing her emotions, that he would sit there equally at ease whether she cried, raged, or ordered another glass of wine and said nothing for 20 minutes. She ordered another glass of wine. They talked for 2 hours. She didn't plan to. She had never, in her entire adult life, found herself in a conversation she hadn't planned to have that lasted 2 hours and had the quality of a conversation she had been, without knowing it, waiting to have. She talked about the archive. She talked about the 1893 land records and the specific texture of what it felt like to handle a document that no living human had touched in 100 years. She talked about the way history wasn't the past, but was actually the present, wearing a disguise, which was something she had been trying to say in academic papers for years and never quite gotten right. And when she said it to Damien Voss, he looked at her with those flat gray eyes and said, "Yes, exactly," with a conviction that suggested he had some personal familiarity with the principle. He talked less than she did. What he said was specific. He asked questions that were too precise to be polite, the kind of questions that people asked when they were actually listening to what you'd said before. She didn't ask about his business again. She wasn't sure why. There was something about his careful vagueness on the subject that she filed alongside the loose board in the floor. Noticed, categorized, not yet examined. Around the time the dining room had thinned to a handful of late tables, she realized that Bryce Calloway and his colleagues had left at some point without her noticing. The space they had occupied near the back of the room was clear and reset. She noticed the absence and found, to some surprise, that she was not particularly sorry about it. Damien Voss walked her out at 11:15. Not walked her to a cab, walked her out, which was different. A distinction she registered without analyzing. The doorman who had been courteous without warmth when she arrived was something else entirely now. A fractional expansion of deference that was directed entirely at the man beside her. The valet materialized from somewhere. "I have a car," Damien said. "I have a cab app," she said. He looked at her. A corner of his mouth moved again. "I'll get you home safe." "I can get myself home safe." "Yes," he said. "You can. I'd like to do it anyway." The November cold was vicious. Her coat was good, but the wind was coming directly east off the lake, and it had teeth. She stood on the sidewalk in front of Etoile Noir and looked at Damien Voss and made the particular calculation that she had spent years becoming precise about, whether a man was safe. It wasn't a calculation she made the same way other people did. She wasn't looking for surface signals, for politeness or charm, or the performance of gentlemanliness, all of which could be produced on demand by people who had no business producing them. She was looking for something underneath, the thing that was true when someone stopped trying. Damien Voss wasn't trying. He had not tried once in the 2 hours she'd sat across from him. He had simply been what he was, which was apparently this: a man of very few words and very complete attention, who sat in rooms like they belonged to him and looked at her like she was worth looking at, and had, for reasons she didn't fully understand, decided to spend a Saturday evening in November making sure she knew it. "Okay," she said. Same word, different architecture. The car was black and long, and she didn't look at the make because she had no reference for cars at this level. The driver was a large man who said nothing and drove with the specific contained precision of someone whose job description extended beyond transportation. Damien sat beside her with 8 inches of leather seat between them, and neither of them tried to fill the silence, and she found the silence was not uncomfortable, which was itself unusual enough to note. "What is it you actually do?" she asked as the city moved past the windows. He looked at her for a moment. "I maintain order," he said, "in spaces where order doesn't come naturally." That sounds, she searched, exhausting. "Yes," he said, and for the first time something crossed his face that looked like tiredness. Real, old, specific tiredness, not the performed kind. "Yes, it is." She was dropped at her building at 11:40. She lived in Wicker Park, a third-floor walk-up, in a building that had been built in 1908 and had good bones and bad heating, and a landlord named Kowalski who responded to maintenance requests with the energy of a man for whom all maintenance requests were deeply personal affronts. Damien got out of the car. She hadn't expected that. He stood on the sidewalk while she found her keys, not moving toward her, not pressing anything, just standing in the cold in his good suit watching the door. "You don't have to," she started. "I know," he said. She turned the key in the outer lock, pushed the door, turned back. "Thank you," she said. I don't know exactly what the right word is." "You don't need a word for it," he said. She stood there for a moment with the cold door at her back and Damien Voss on the sidewalk in front of her, and the particular feeling of a night that had not gone the way she'd planned, going in a direction she hadn't accounted for. A feeling she didn't have a precise vocabulary for. Something between unsettled and alive. "Good night, Mr. Voss." "Good night, Savannah." She went upstairs. She did not watch from the window. She had a policy about watching from windows. She sat on the edge of her bed in the emerald dress and put her hands flat on her thighs and breathed, in for 4, out for 6, and tried to make some order out of the shape of the evening. She couldn't. She tried to think about Bryce and found the wound was duller than it should have been, as though something had moved the air around it, not healed it, but altered the acoustics. She tried to think about Damien Voss and found that the more she reached for a category for him, the more the category slipped. The January lake eyes, the way he had said, "my treasure," as though it were simply true. The tiredness on his face when she said his work sounded exhausting, the way the maitre d' had pivoted, the way the driver had driven. She pulled up her laptop, typed his name. The first 3 results were business listings. Voss Holdings, LLC, a real estate concern with an address in the Loop. Voss Meridian Properties, another entity. The filings were clean and thorough and told her almost nothing except that the man had more corporate infrastructure than most people accumulated in a lifetime. The 4th result was a Tribune piece from 6 years ago. She clicked it. The headline was, "Chicago Underworld, the New Architecture of Power." Damien Voss was mentioned 4 times. Never as a confirmed anything, always in the specific, legally insulated language of journalism that described things adjacent to facts without being facts themselves. Sources indicate. Alleged to have. Understood to control. But what the sources indicated, what was alleged, what was understood, she sat with it for a long moment, read it twice, set the laptop aside. Outside her window, Chicago was doing what Chicago did at midnight. The specific low hum of a city that didn't go quiet. The distant siren, the wind off the lake, finding the gaps in the building, the sound of someone's television in the unit below. She had sat for 2 hours across a dinner table from the man the Tribune sources allegedly understood to control a significant portion of the city's unofficial economy. She had talked about land records and the texture of history. He had asked precise questions and said, yes, exactly. She should be alarmed. She identified the feeling and tested it, and found that what she actually felt was something more complicated. Not absence of alarm exactly, but alarm coexisting with something else that had its own weight and gravity. The feeling of a woman who had spent years being seen in exactly the wrong ways and had spent one evening being seen differently and had not yet decided what to do about it. She would decide in the morning. She had good decision-making in the mornings. She was reaching for the lamp when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text. Not a call. The paper you published on the 1893 deeds. Were you able to get access to the original Langford survey documents, or did you work from copies? She stared at the screen. Then she looked at the question again. Really looked at it. The 1893 Langford survey documents were a specific set of records she had referenced in her paper. One of the foundational land surveys of the post-fire South Side, produced by a survey firm contracted by the city and signed off by a municipal official named Harlan Langford. She had worked from copies because the originals were part of a private collection that had never been made available for academic review. She had noted this in her footnotes, and it had been a source of professional frustration for 3 years. She had also, in the process of that research, developed a suspicion, not confirmed, not publishable, not something she had put on paper anywhere, that the Langford survey documents contained discrepancies that, if the originals could ever be examined, might point to something considerably larger than academic irregularity. She sat on the edge of her bed in the emerald dress at midnight in November and looked at the question on her phone screen from a number she didn't have. She typed, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who may have access to what you've been looking for." Then, after a 3-second pause, "And someone who has reasons of his own to want to know what those documents say." Savannah's thumbs were still over the keyboard. The room was cold. The building hummed around her. She thought about the Tribune article. She thought about the maitre d's pivot. She thought about tiredness behind precise gray eyes and the plain, unperformed weight of 2 words delivered across white linen. His loss, my treasure. Her thumbs moved. What reasons? This time the pause was longer. 7 seconds. 8. Then, meet me Monday. 11 a.m. I'll send an address. And then before she could respond, bring your notes on the Langford survey. All of them. There are people who want those documents to stay buried. I need to know if you already know why. She set the phone down on the nightstand, looked at the ceiling. The plaster was old and had a network of hairline cracks that she'd traced with her eyes on many nights of difficult sleeping. She knew the ceiling the way she knew her own hands. She picked the phone back up. I'll be there, she typed. She hit send before she could think about it better. And then she sat there in the emerald dress in the November cold of a Wicker Park walk-up, with the ceiling full of cracks above her and a phone full of questions beside her and the specific electric feeling of a woman who has just agreed to walk toward something she cannot yet see. And somewhere across the city, in a room she had never been to, a man whose name had rippled through the dining room of Étoile Noire like a stone through still water was looking at her reply on a phone of his own. And he was not smiling. He was looking at the 3 words she had sent and thinking about the Langford documents, and thinking about Victor Langford, and thinking about the particular quality of a woman who reached for the thing she couldn't name rather than turning away from it. And he was thinking that he had made an error tonight, a small one, the kind of small error that had consequences. He had sat down at a stranger's table because something in him, something old and practical and not given to impulse, had found the moment unbearable. A woman in a green dress counting her breaths at a table in a room full of people pretending not to watch. He had sat down, and he had said what he said, and he had made a calculation that would not survive the night unaltered, because Savannah Reed had not needed rescuing. He saw that within the first 30 seconds. She was managing herself with the particular precision of someone who had managed worse. She hadn't needed him, but he had needed, apparently, to sit down. That was the error. Because if he was right about what was in the Langford documents, and he was right about almost everything eventually, which was both his most useful quality and occasionally his most costly one, then the woman who had just agreed to meet him on Monday morning was about to walk directly into the path of the most dangerous thing he was currently trying to keep anyone from walking into. He put the phone in his coat pocket, looked out at Chicago through the window. Victor Langford was going to find out about Monday. That was the thing about this city. It had no secrets, only information that hadn't moved fast enough yet. He had until Monday morning to decide how much of the truth to give her. He already knew it wasn't enough. The address Damien sent was not what she expected. She had expected something that announced itself. A glass tower, a private club, the kind of address that communicated power through real estate, the way some men communicated it through tailoring. Instead, the address was in Bridgeport, a neighborhood of bungalows and machine shops and old Democratic ward infrastructure, the kind of Chicago neighborhood that had been quietly powerful for 100 years without ever needing to advertise it. The building was a 3-story brick commercial property on a street of similar buildings, the ground floor occupied by what appeared to be a functioning dry cleaner with a hand-lettered sign in the window. There was no indication that anything above the dry cleaner was anything other than storage. Savannah stood on the sidewalk at 10:58 on Monday morning with a canvas tote bag containing her laptop, 2 legal pads of notes, and a folder of photocopied documents that represented 3 years of carefully assembled suspicion about the Langford family's foundational property holdings in Chicago. The November had gotten colder overnight. Her breath made small clouds in front of her face. A door beside the dry cleaner opened. The large driver from Saturday night was standing in it. He said nothing. He simply held the door. She went in. The stairs were narrow and clean, and the walls were plain painted drywall with nothing on them. The second floor was an open room that appeared to be used for genuine storage. Folded tables, stacked chairs, boxes of what looked like restaurant supplies. The third floor was different. It was a working space, not an office in the conventional sense. No reception, no branding, no "the company is doing well" signage. A long table with 4 laptops open on it, filing cabinets that were actually used, judging by the wear on the handles. A wall of windows facing east, covered in a light-filtering film that let in illumination without letting anyone outside see in. 3 men working quietly at the table looked up when she entered, and then looked back down at their screens with the specific, calibrated incuriosity of people who had been instructed to be incurious. Damien Voss was standing at the window. He looked like he hadn't slept well, which surprised her. Not that he looked bad. He didn't look bad. He looked the same way he had Saturday, the same quality of contained presence in a good suit. But there was something around his eyes that had the particular texture of a man who had spent the hours between midnight and 5 in the morning doing things that were not resting. "You came," he said. "I said I would. Some people say things. I'm not some people." He looked at her for a moment in a way that she was starting to recognize, that complete cataloging attention, as though he were updating something. Then he moved to the long table and pulled out a chair at one end and sat down. And she sat at the other end without being asked. And the 3 men with the laptops relocated to the far side of the room with the smooth, practiced efficiency of people who did this regularly. "Tell me what you know about the Langford survey documents," he said. No preamble, no review of Saturday. No acknowledgement that the context of their acquaintance was a restaurant, an emerald dress, a public humiliation. She found she didn't mind. She had been turning the Langford question over since she'd sent him the text on Saturday night, and she wanted to get to it. She had notes. She had been building toward this for 3 years in the particular slow-burn way of archival research, which was not the way of dramatic revelations, but was the way of accumulated evidence that didn't quite cohere until suddenly it did. Harlan Langford, she said, was a city surveyor in 1891. Contracted by the municipal government after the fire to survey and formally document land boundaries in the South Side expansion zones. The survey documents he produced in 1892 and 1893 became the legal foundation for something like 200 property transfers in the decade that followed. She opened her laptop, pulled up files she had organized for this conversation, not knowing exactly what shape the conversation would take, but knowing it would need to be organized. "The copies I've worked from have 3 irregularities I can document. Parcel boundaries that don't reconcile with the underlying survey pins described in contemporary municipal records. Notarization dates that sequence incorrectly. And a signature pattern, Langford's countersignature on 17 of the transfers, that doesn't match his authenticated signatures on documents from the same period." Damien was listening with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on her. "The irregularities, if they're in the originals and not artifacts of the copying process, point to falsified boundary documentation on approximately 30 parcels in the South Side expansion. Those parcels were transferred between 1893 and 1901 to a holding company called the Illinois Meridian Land Trust, which dissolved in 1904, whose assets were distributed to 4 individuals, 3 of whom I can trace through probate records to the current Langford family." She paused. Victor Langford's great-grandfather was one of the 4. The room was very quiet. The 3 men at the far end were not visibly listening. "The property involved," Savannah said, keeping her voice level, if I'm reading the chain of title correctly, includes land that is currently the footprint of 7 significant commercial and infrastructure projects in the South Side. One of which is a development currently in city council approval that Victor Langford has been publicly championing. She closed the laptop. If the original survey documents show what I think they show, the foundational title to that land was fraudulent. And Victor Langford knows it because he's a real estate attorney by training, and his family has been managing that specific chain of title for 4 generations. Damien looked at her for a long moment. You've had this for how long? The shape of it? 2 years. Documented to the standard I'd need to publish it? I've been stuck at about 70% for 8 months because I cannot get access to the original survey documents. They're in a private collection, the Langford Family Trust. Something moved in his face that wasn't quite the suggestion of a smile and wasn't quite something else. They own the evidence. They own the originals of the documents that would either confirm or disprove what the copies suggest. Yes. He stood up, moved to one of the filing cabinets, opened a drawer and removed a folder that was thick and worn at the edges, the kind of folder that had been opened and re-examined many times. He brought it to the table and set it in front of her. She opened it. The documents inside were not photocopies. They were photographs, high resolution, taken with professional equipment, of original documents. She could tell by the texture, the aging, the specific quality of 19th century paper rendered in precise digital image. She flipped to the second page, the third. Her hands had gone still. Where did you get these? That's not information you need. These are the originals. Photographs of them. How? She stopped. Reset. These are the 1892 survey documents, the actual originals. She was looking at page 4, which was one of the 17 transfer documents she had flagged for signature irregularity. She looked at Harlan Langford's countersignature at the bottom of the page and then opened her laptop to a reference file and looked at his authenticated signature from a probate document dated 6 months earlier. The difference was not subtle. In the probate document, Langford's signature had a specific looping characteristic in the capital H that was consistent across every authenticated example she had. In the transfer document, the H was upright. A different pen, possibly. A different hand, more likely. It's forged, she said. Not with drama, just with the particular flat certainty of someone who had been looking at this question for 3 years and had just received the answer. Yes, Damien said. All 17? 22. There are 5 transfers the copies you worked from don't include. They were removed from the municipal records at some point in the 1970s. He sat back down across from her. Victor Langford's father oversaw a legal effort in 1974 to consolidate and, in some cases, restrict access to certain historical city records. It was framed as archival management. It was actually the removal of the documents most directly tied to the original fraud. Savannah looked at him. How long have you known about this? I've known pieces of it for a long time. I've known the shape of it for about 2 years. He paused. I've been trying to get access to documents your research pointed to. Your paper from 4 years ago was the first time someone had assembled the chain of evidence in print, which is why certain people read it very carefully. Certain people meaning Langford's legal team filed 3 separate requests with your institution to review your research materials in the 18 months after that paper was published. Did your supervisor tell you about that? She stared at him. No. Marcus Elroy told them your notes were not available for external review, which is correct under the archive's research policies. He also told them, in a follow-up communication, that the research had been superseded by subsequent scholarship and was not a direction the archive intended to pursue further. Damien's voice was completely even. Did he tell you that either? The cold in the room was different now. Or maybe it was the same cold and she was feeling it differently. She thought about Marcus Elroy and his performance reviews with words like thorough and reliable, and the 3 funding proposals she had submitted in the last 2 years that had been declined for reasons that were always technically sensible and always landed on the Langford-related work specifically. No, she said. Her voice was tight. He didn't. Elroy has been on the board of the Langford Community Foundation for 6 years. It's not in his city bio. You'd have to pull the 990 filings to find it. She sat with this. The specific ugly texture of it. The way betrayal from a direction you weren't watching had a different quality than betrayal you'd been braced for. She had not been braced for Marcus Elroy. She had found him professionally frustrating and occasionally dismissive, and she had chalked it up to the specific variety of mediocrity that floated to institutional management positions because it was risk-averse and consistent. She had not considered that it might be something more organized than mediocrity. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because I need you to understand what you're walking into." "That implies I'm walking into something." "You already have," Damien said. "You sent me those notes Saturday. You came here Monday. If Langford's people are watching the research landscape around this topic, and they are, then the fact that you had dinner with me Saturday night is already a data point for them." She looked at him. "You're saying I'm in danger. I'm saying you should understand the terrain." "That's not an answer." He looked at her for a moment. "There are people whose financial and political position depends entirely on those documents staying where they are. Victor Langford is not a careful man about most things, but he is a careful man about this. He has spent 50 years and significant money maintaining the specific arrangement of the historical record that keeps his family's foundational claim to that land unquestioned." He paused. Finding out that a historical archivist has been independently assembling a challenge to that claim and has now made contact with someone Langford already considers an adversary. That is a problem for him, a significant one, and Victor Langford solves problems. The three men at the far end of the room had stopped pretending to work. One of them was watching the door with the specific quality of attention that Savannah associated with people whose primary professional concern was the distinction between safe and not safe. "Who are you to Victor Langford?" she asked. "An ongoing complication," Damien said. "That's also not an answer. We're competing for the same property, not the land from the 1893 surveys directly. A current development. The Southside Infrastructure Project I believe you mentioned. Langford has city council relationships that have been routing approvals his way for years. I've been challenging that routing." He said it plainly, without the specific corporate language people use to describe things that were more complicated than corporate language accommodated. "We have been, for approximately 3 years, attempting to dismantle each other's capacity to operate in this city. He has tried to do it through political leverage. I have tried to do it through other means." "What other means?" He looked at her steadily. "The kind that don't appear in city council meeting minutes." She held his gaze. "I need you to be straight with me about what you are. I read the Tribune piece." "I know you did." "I need to hear it from you." He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, not performing reluctance or calculation. It was the quiet of a man choosing precision over performance. "I run operations in this city that are not all legal," he said. "I have for 20 years. The legitimate business infrastructure is real, the real estate holdings, the investment vehicles. But they're not the whole picture. I have relationships with people who operate outside the law, and I maintain order in spaces where the official mechanisms of order don't function. That is accurate." He paused. "I'm not going to apologize for it or dress it differently. You asked." She breathed. "In for 4. The table was very solid under her hands, and the South Side development is legitimate," he said. "Completely. The funding is documented, the partners are above board, the project is what it says it is, which is exactly why Langford is threatened by it. Because if my name is attached to a legitimate development that wins over his corrupt one, it undermines the story he's been telling about me for years." Something moved under the surface of his voice. "I intend to win. With my research." "With your research as part of it, yes." He didn't flinch. "I won't pretend I sat down at your table Saturday for entirely altruistic reasons. I knew who you were. I knew about the Langford research. The timing was accidental to an extent. The dinner, Calloway, I didn't arrange that. But when I saw you, I made a calculation." Savannah looked at him. There was something in her chest that was doing something complicated. Not the cold water sensation of Saturday, not anger exactly, but a specific variety of feeling that she recognized as the feeling of someone telling you a difficult truth about themselves when they didn't have to, and watching to see if you could hold it. "Mostly altruistic," she said. He didn't deny it. "I would have sat down regardless, but yes, not entirely." She closed the folder of photographs, put her hands flat on the table. "I want something in return. Tell me. When this is done, when the documents are public record and Langford is exposed, I want full academic credit for the research. Complete attribution. I want the Langford collection made available to the municipal archive." She paused. "And I want Marcus Elroy's interference documented. In writing, in a form I can use." Damien looked at her. "Done." All three, he said. She nodded once, picked up the folder. "Then we have an arrangement." She was reaching for her canvas tote when the door at the far end of the room opened without a knock, and the large driver came in with a phone in his hand and an expression that told Savannah, in the 3 seconds before anyone spoke, that something had changed. He crossed the room in 8 steps and put the phone on the table in front of Damien. Damien looked at the screen. Whatever was on it, he looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, and then his face did something she hadn't seen it do before. It went flat. Not the careful containment of a man managing something. Flat in the specific way of a man for whom something has just resolved from uncertain to certain, and the certainty is not good. He looked up at one of the men at the far wall. "When?" 20 minutes ago, the man said. "Where?" "Outside. He was parked on Racine when you arrived." Savannah looked between them. "What happened?" Damien put the phone face down on the table, looked at her. The decision was visible. She could actually see it moving behind the gray eyes, the particular calculation of what to tell her and how fast. "Someone photographed you coming in," he said. "We have the vehicle. It's registered to a logistics company that does work for Langford Properties." The room's temperature did not change. Everything else did. She sat very still. "He already knows." "He knows you came here. He doesn't know what was said or what you have. He'll assume." "Yes," Damien said. "He will." She looked at the folder in her hands. The photographs of documents that a family had spent 50 years and apparently significant institutional leverage, making sure no one assembled into exactly the shape she had just assembled them. She looked at the folder and thought about the 1893 land records and Marcus Elroy's performance reviews and the dry cleaner sign on the ground floor and an emerald dress on a Saturday night and the specific cold water sensation of a sentence she hadn't wanted to hear. She thought about all of it, and then she put the folder in her canvas tote and zipped it closed. "I need to get into the archive tonight," she said. "There are physical documents there, not the Langford originals, but my working files, my notes, the chain of title analysis I've built for 3 years. If Langford's people move on the archive, they won't move on the archive tonight." Damien's voice was very steady. "Not yet. Tonight he's gathering information. He'll move when he understands the full picture, and he doesn't have it yet." He paused. "But yes, the physical materials need to be secured. Tonight. I can get in. I have a key. You won't go alone." She looked at him. "I work there by myself every day." Not tonight." He said it in the same voice he'd said everything in, even precise, not heated. The voice of someone accustomed to people accepting what he said, because the alternative had a specific and documented weight to it. "Tonight is different." She held his gaze for a moment. The room hummed around them. The man at the far wall was on his phone. The driver had gone back to the door. Through the light-filtered windows, the Monday morning was flat and gray, and the city below the windows looked like it always did, which meant nothing. "Fine," she said. She stood up, adjusted the tote on her shoulder, looked at Damien Voss, who was also standing, who was looking at her with those flat gray eyes, and the very specific expression of a man recalculating the speed at which a situation he had initiated was now moving. "For what it's worth," she said, "I would have found this without you. Eventually." "I know," he said. "That's why it had to be now." She left the folder assessment of what that meant for later. There were things to do. They drove to the archive at 11:45. The building was a gray stone structure on Washington Street, 5 stories. Built in the 1930s with the solid institutional confidence of an era that believed in permanence. Savannah's key opened the side entrance. The lobby guard, a man named Raymond, who had worked the desk for 11 years and always had a crossword in progress, looked up with the specific mild surprise of someone seeing a colleague on an unexpected day. "Dr. Reed, didn't think you were in today." "Research emergency," she said. It was even, technically, true. Raymond looked at the man behind her, at the second man behind him, one she hadn't seen get out of the car, but who had appeared with the quiet competence of someone whose job included appearing without announcement. Sign in, Raymond said, his voice now carrying a register it hadn't had a moment ago. Of course, Damien said, and signed the book with a name Savannah didn't look at. The archive proper was on the third floor. The elevator was slow and smelled of old paper and metal and the specific institutional cleaning product that Savannah had been breathing for 7 years. She pressed 3 and the doors closed, and the 3 of them rode up in silence. Your supervisor, Damien said quietly as the floors moved. Is he in today? He's usually in on Mondays. If he asks what you're doing here, I'll handle Marcus, she said. The elevator opened on the third floor. The archive was a series of connected rooms, a public reading room at the front, a staff workspace, and behind a heavy fire door, the collection itself. Rows of metal shelving extending back 40 feet, temperature and humidity controlled, lit by long fluorescent panels that hummed faintly. Savannah's workspace was in the staff room, a desk she had occupied for 7 years, a filing cabinet, and a locked drawer where she kept her most sensitive working materials. Marcus Elroy's office was at the far end of the staff room. His light was on. She went to her desk, pulled her keys, opened the bottom drawer. Her working files on the Langford research, 3 years of legal pads, printed documents, annotated photocopies, a chain of title analysis she had constructed by hand on a series of large format sheets, were where she had left them on Friday. She was reaching for the first stack when she heard footsteps behind her. Savannah! Marcus Elroy's voice had a specific quality she had spent years misreading. She had read it as the voice of a man mildly interested in his own institutional position, risk-averse, and careful in the small-bore way of career bureaucrats. She heard it differently now, standing at her filing drawer on a Monday morning she wasn't supposed to be here, with the photographs of forged 1893 documents in her tote bag, and Damien Voss standing 12 feet behind her in the archive's staff room. She turned around. Marcus was 61. He had the build of a man who had been athletic in his 30s and had let it go in a way that was still visible as athletic, if you looked at the frame. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the careful blankness of institutional management, not the faint condescension of someone who found her useful but not threatening. Alarm. I got called in, she said, before he could speak. There's a discrepancy in the Burnham collection cross-reference. I wanted to pull the working files before... Those aren't Burnham materials, Marcus said. He was looking at the drawer, at the stack she was holding. His voice was completely level, but his right hand had gone to the doorframe of his office in a gesture that was almost casual and was not. Those are the Langford files. They're my research files. Files produced on archive time, on archive resources, in connection with archive projects fall under the institution's intellectual property framework, he said. You know that. Savannah looked at him. Marcus, you should leave those where they are. They're my notes, my analysis. Savannah. His voice had dropped, almost gentle. The gentleness of someone trying to contain something they considered manageable if the other person cooperated. I think you should come talk to me in my office. There are some things about the direction of the Langford research that the institution needs to... The Langford Community Foundation, she said. He stopped. Board of Directors, she said. 6 years. How long were you planning to manage my research without telling me you had a financial relationship with the family? The silence in the staff room had a specific weight. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the collection behind the fire door, a climate control unit cycled on. Marcus's face had done something complicated. The alarm was still there, but something else had moved in behind it. Something that was also in the voice of a man who had made calculations about situations like this one, and was now recalculating because the situation had variables he hadn't accounted for. His eyes moved to Damien Voss. Whatever he knew, whatever he'd been told or had figured out or had suspected, the moment his eyes landed on Damien, the calculation visibly accelerated. His hand tightened on the doorframe. You need to leave, Marcus said. Not to Savannah. To Damien. This is a restricted access facility and you don't... He's with me, Savannah said. That doesn't... He's with me, she said again, and her voice had something in it that she recognized as the voice she used when she had stopped managing the temperature of a conversation and was simply stating the outcome. And I'm taking my files. If you want to have the conversation about institutional IP, we can have it with the union rep present and a full documentation of the communications you had with Langford's legal team about my research. I genuinely welcome that conversation, Marcus. Would you? The silence stretched. Marcus Elroy looked at her files, looked at Damien, looked back at her. The alarm in his face had become something else. She didn't have a word for it. It was the look of a man standing at the end of something, seeing the end. He stepped back from the doorframe. She took the files. She was at the fire door to the main collection, her hand on the handle, the stack of 3 years' work under her other arm, when her phone buzzed. Not a call. An alert from the archive's own security system, which she had access to as a senior staff member. She looked at the screen. External door breach. Side entrance. 3 unidentified individuals. She turned around. Damien's phone was already out. He had seen something on it that had produced the same expression as the driver's message this morning, that specific, resolved flatness. "We need to go," he said. "Now." "What?" The car on Racine wasn't gathering information. His voice was completely even, which was somehow worse than if it hadn't been. It was confirming the location. She looked at the security alert on her phone. 3 individuals. Side entrance. The entrance she had used. Raymond's desk. "Raymond," she said, "my people are already with him." He was moving. The second man who had come up in the elevator was at the fire door to the stairs. "There's a freight elevator at the back of the collection. Does it go to the basement loading dock?" "Yes." "Does the loading dock have an exterior access?" "Yes. Washington Street, East Side. Go." He said it the same way he said everything. Level, not loud. It was a word with a specific gravity, not a request. Now. She went. The collection was 40 feet deep, and she knew every row of it by heart, had walked these specific aisles in the particular half-light of the fluorescence at every hour of the day and in some hours of the night, and she walked them now faster than she had ever walked them, the files under her arm and her tote on her shoulder and her heels loud on the sealed concrete floor. Behind her, she could hear Damien and the second man following, could hear the specific quality of their footsteps, purposeful, contained, the footsteps of men accustomed to moving through difficulty at speed without producing more noise than necessary. She hit the freight elevator button. The car was 2 floors down. She hit the button again. From somewhere behind the fire door she had just come through, she heard a sound that was not the archive's climate control, and was not Marcus Elroy's footsteps, and was not anything she had a comfortable category for. The freight elevator opened. She got in. Damien's hand caught the door before it could close. He looked at her. 1 full second of eye contact in the freight elevator's yellow light, those January lake eyes completely steady. And then he stepped in, and the door closed behind the 3 of them, and the elevator began its descent. In the 12 seconds it took to reach the basement, Savannah stood with her back against the elevator wall and her files against her chest, and her heart doing something that she was not going to call panic, because she had a policy about panic. And she thought about 3 years of research and Marcus Elroy's hand on the doorframe and an 1893 forged signature in a document that a family had spent 50 years burying, and she thought about the sound she had heard through the fire door. The elevator hit the basement. The door opened onto the loading dock. Cold air from the exterior access, the smell of old concrete and exhaust. She didn't look back. She walked into the cold. And behind her, in the building she had worked in for 7 years, in the archive that held the history of a city that had been burning things down and rebuilding them on fraudulent foundations since 1871, something was. The loading dock smelled of diesel and old cardboard and the specific cold of a Chicago basement in November that had never once in its existence been warm enough for anyone to forget they were underground. Savannah came through the exterior access door at a pace that was not quite running because she had made a decision in the freight elevator that she was not going to run. That running was a specific kind of surrender to a specific kind of fear, and she was not going to do it. And she walked fast across the loading dock concrete with her files against her chest, and her tote cutting into her shoulder and the cold hitting her face like a flat hand. The second man, she still didn't know his name, hadn't asked, came through the door first and moved left along the exterior wall of the building with the particular efficiency of someone sweeping a space for problems. Damien came through behind her and put a hand briefly at her back, not gripping, just directional, and said, "Car's 30 seconds east," and she walked east. The black car was at the curb with the engine running. She got in. Damien got in on the other side. The second man took the front passenger seat. The driver pulled into Washington Street traffic before the door was fully closed. Nobody spoke for 45 seconds. Savannah sat with her files on her lap and her hands on top of the files and watched Chicago move past the window. The gray stone buildings, the pedestrians with their heads down against the wind, the ordinary Monday morning of a city that had no idea what was happening in a loading dock on its east side. And she counted her breaths and did not allow herself to process the sound she had heard through the fire door, because processing it in a moving car when she could not do anything about what it meant was a waste of the specific mental energy she was going to need for whatever came next. "Raymond?" she said. "Safe," Damien said. "I had 2 people with him from the moment we signed in." "You anticipated this." "I considered it possible." She turned from the window and looked at him. "You considered it possible that Langford would send people to the archive, and you brought me there anyway." "I needed to know if he'd move that fast." His voice was level. "Now I know." The specific cold of that landed differently than the loading dock cold. She sat with it. "I was the test. You were the variable that would tell me his timeline." He looked at her steadily. "If he moved in under 24 hours of seeing you walk into my building, it means his surveillance on the research landscape was already active before Saturday. It means he's been watching the Langford question for months. It means he already knew about me," she said. "Before dinner, before you." "Yes." She looked at the files in her lap. 3 years of legal pads and annotated photocopies and chain of title analysis that she had built in the particular slow, careful way of archival research, the way that didn't make noise, the way that she had believed was quiet enough to be safe. She had believed that. She had been wrong about it for apparently at least 8 months. "How much does he know?" she said. "About the research specifically. Probably the shape of it. Your published paper tells him the foundational argument. What he doesn't know is how far you've gotten since, or what the photographs I showed you this morning confirm." He paused. "He knows you came to me. He knows you left with materials. He doesn't yet know what the materials prove, but he'll assume they prove enough." "Yes." She looked out the window again. The car had moved north, into the grid of streets that Savannah could navigate with her eyes closed after 7 years of living in this city, and the familiar geography of it was doing nothing to make anything feel less disorienting. She had a specific feeling that she identified and categorized. The feeling of a floor she thought was solid, having a quality she hadn't tested, and it turned out to be something other than solid. Not collapse, but a shift. The discovery that the architecture of the last 3 years had been constructed inside a situation that had known about her longer than she had known about it. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere that isn't on any list Langford has," Damien said. They drove for 20 minutes. The destination was a property in Lincoln Square, a narrow 3-story building on a residential street that looked like a private residence, and was, technically, though the ground floor had been converted into something between a safe house and a working space with the specific, functional lack of comfort of a place that people used rather than lived in. There were no photographs on the walls. There was a table, several chairs, a kitchen that had the equipment for making coffee, and nothing else, and a room at the back with a door that was heavier than residential doors needed to be. There was also a man waiting. He was sitting at the table when they came in, and Savannah stopped in the doorway because the quality of his stillness was the specific stillness of someone who had been there long enough to stop looking at the door and had gone back to looking at whatever was in front of him, which was a laptop and a phone and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He was perhaps 50, with the build of a former military person that she was learning to recognize as a specific physical type. Not large exactly, but dense, the kind of person whose center of gravity was lower than it looked. He had close-cropped gray hair and the face of someone who had spent significant time outdoors in difficult conditions and had arrived at a relationship with his own appearance that was completely indifferent. He looked up when they came in. "Karev," Damien said. Not a greeting, an acknowledgement. "They went through the 3rd floor," Karev said. His voice was flat, Eastern European under the American, the accent worn down but present in the vowels. "Reading room, staff workspace, the collection through the fire door. They were looking for physical materials. They didn't find what they were looking for." "Because she has them," Damien said. Karev looked at Savannah, at the files, back at Damien. "We have a problem." "Tell me." Karev closed the laptop, put both hands flat on the table. The gesture had a specific quality, the quality of a person preparing to deliver information they know will change the shape of a room. The photographs I pulled from the Langford collection, Karev said. The originals I got access to 3 weeks ago. He paused. One beat. They were placed. Savannah heard the word and understood it, and did not immediately understand what she was understanding. She stood in the doorway with the files against her chest and waited. Placed, Damien said. His voice had not changed. This was somehow worse than if it had changed. The access I used to get into the Langford private collection. The contact who facilitated it. Karev looked at Damien with the expression of a man delivering news to someone he respects, and would have preferred not to deliver it to. He's Langford's. Has been for at least 2 years. Everything we pulled from that collection, the photographs, the survey documents, the transfer records, it was available to us because Langford wanted it to be available. The room was very quiet. Savannah's hands had tightened on the files without her deciding to tighten them. She could feel the edges of the legal pads through the cover sheet, the specific resistance of 3 years of accumulated paper. The documents are fake, she said. Not a question. She was already moving through it, the archivist's mind doing what it did, following the chain backward, re-examining every link. The photographs you showed me this morning, the forged signatures, the 22 transfer documents. We don't know that yet, Karev said. We know the access was compromised. We don't know if the documents themselves were altered before we photographed them, or if the photographs were manipulated after, or if... I need to see them again, she said. She was already moving to the table, already putting the files down, already opening her tote for her laptop. The signature analysis I did this morning. If the documents were fabricated to match the irregularities I described in my published paper, there will be forensic tells. The paper I published described the irregularities in the copies, not the originals. If someone built fake originals to match what I described, they'd be building to a description rather than to an actual historical hand. The errors would be Savannah. Damien's voice. She stopped, looked up. He was standing at the table and he was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the flat, resolved look of a man processing information. Something that had more dimension to it. Something that was almost... She examined it and felt the examination go somewhere she hadn't expected. Something that was almost sorry. Sit down, he said. I don't need to sit down. I need to... Please. The word landed differently than she expected. He didn't use please often. When he did, it had a specific weight. Not politeness, not performance, but the weight of a man who was asking rather than directing because the situation called for asking. She sat down. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. Karev remained standing, near the window. The driver and the second man were somewhere else in the house, or outside, or both. The documents you described in your 2021 paper, Damien said. The irregularities. The signature discrepancies, the notarization dating, the parcel boundaries. Yes. How detailed was that description? She looked at him. Detailed enough to publish. I had to be precise enough for the argument to be academically defensible. Precise enough that someone reading the paper carefully would have a specific technical description of what the original documents would need to show in order to confirm the fraud. She could feel where this was going. She could feel it the way you feel a vehicle braking hard before you've consciously registered the obstacle, the body knowing ahead of the mind. Yes, she said, quietly. Langford's legal team read that paper within 3 months of publication, Damien said. They requested your research materials. When Elroy confirmed the materials weren't accessible, they spent the next 2 years not doing nothing. He paused. They spent 2 years building a set of documents, built to the exact specification of what your paper described, built to confirm your theory, built to be found. The specific ugly shape of it assembled itself in Savannah's mind with the particular efficiency of someone whose professional life was the assembly of historical evidence into coherent arguments. They built a trap, she said. They built an evidence package, Damien said, designed to look like it confirms the fraud, designed to be irresistible to someone who has been looking for exactly this for 3 years, designed to be brought out by someone, me, or someone like me, to someone, you, in a way that would produce exactly what happened this morning. What happened this morning? You left the archive with materials, he said. You left under circumstances that will be documented. You left in the company of someone whose legal status makes anything he touches legally radioactive. Whatever you put into the public record based on those photographs, he stopped. Let her finish it. She finished it. Would be immediately discredited. The documents are fabrications. I'd be publishing a fraud as historical evidence. My credibility... She stopped, felt the full dimension of it. My research on the actual irregularities, everything I've built for 3 years. It all gets buried under the publication of a falsified document set. I become the archivist who fabricated evidence, or was manipulated into publishing fabrications. She looked at him. My career. Yes, he said. And your position, she said. If you bring fabricated evidence to challenge Langford's title, is worse than having nothing, he said. Yes, we'd both be destroyed. His title to the land is bulletproofed. My legal challenge collapses. And Victor Langford has a documented case that both of us attempted to defraud the city using falsified historical records. She sat with this. In for 4. Out for 6. The table was very solid. The coffee smell from the cold cup was very specific. The real documents, she said. The actual originals. They exist. They exist, Karev said from the window. In the Langford family's private collection in their estate in Lake Forest, held in a climate-controlled archive that is part of a private trust, legally structured in a way that makes judicial access to it difficult, Damien said. Essentially impossible without either a criminal warrant, which requires a level of existing evidence we don't have, or physical access to the estate. Savannah looked at Karev. You got into the collection once. I got into the collection Langford wanted me to get into, Karev said, without inflection. The real collection is different. How different? The estate has 12 full-time security personnel. The archive specifically has a biometric access system installed 18 months ago. The collection itself is in a vault that requires 2-key authorization. He paused. It was built to be inaccessible. Langford has known for 2 years that someone was going to come for those documents eventually. He built the vault because he had something real to protect. Because the real documents do show what I think they show, Savannah said. Yes, Damien said. She looked at her files on the table, at 3 years of careful, patient, methodical work, at the legal pads with her handwriting on them, the archivist's handwriting, small and precise and annotated in 3 colors of ink, at the chain of title analysis that she had built link by link in the particular slow way that built things that lasted. She thought about her paper, about the precision of what she'd published, about the way she had described, in academic language with footnoted specificity, the exact texture of what evidence of the fraud would look like. She had published a roadmap. She had published it openly, which was what scholars did, which was what the discipline required. And Victor Langford had read that roadmap and spent 2 years building a false destination at the end of it. She put her hands flat on the table. Marcus, she said. Damien waited. Marcus Elroy has been on the Langford Foundation board for 6 years. He has had access to my research materials and my working notes for that entire time. She looked at Damien. Not just access to the published paper, access to my desk, my files, my conversations with colleagues. He has known the full shape of the research, not just what I published, but what I couldn't publish yet because I didn't have the originals. Karev straightened slightly at the window. If Langford built fake documents to match my published description, Savannah said, but Marcus has been feeding him the unpublished detail, the specific elements of my chain of title analysis that I haven't put in print yet. Then the fabricated documents won't just match my published paper, they'll match things I haven't said publicly. Things that would be almost impossible to fabricate without inside knowledge of where my unpublished research was pointing. She looked at Damien, which means if I examine the fabricated documents against my unpublished notes and they match elements I never published. We have evidence of the collaboration between Elroy and Langford, Damien said. His voice had changed slightly. Not warmth exactly, but the specific quality of a man recalculating toward something he hadn't seen coming and finding it useful. More than that, she said. If they built the fake documents to match my unpublished research, the fabrication itself becomes evidence. The specific demonstrable fact that the fake documents reflect non-public information about the real fraud means someone with access to my research fed that information to whoever built the fakes. Which means the real fraud is real enough that Langford spent 2 years and significant resources trying to preemptively destroy the person who was close to proving it. The room was quiet for a moment. Karev looked at Damien. Something passed between them. Not a look of surprise exactly, but the look of two people recalibrating the same situation at the same speed. "You'd need to document it precisely," Karev said to her. "The comparison. The non-public elements in the fabricated documents versus your unpublished notes. Dated, time-stamped, independently verified." "I know how to document things," she said. The edge in her voice was specific, and she didn't smooth it. "It is literally my profession." "It would take time," Damien said. "And while you're doing it, Langford knows I left the archive with my files," she said. "He knows I'm with you. He's going to move before we can build the comparison." "Yes." "How long do we have?" Damien looked at Karev. The calculation was visible, the two of them running numbers on a timeline she didn't have full access to, the specific arithmetic of people who operated in spaces where time had different stakes. 48 hours, Karev said. Maybe less. He'll want this resolved before the city council vote on the South Side development. That vote is in 72 hours. 72 hours. Savannah looked at her files, at the work, at the years of it. "Then I need to start now," she said. She opened the first legal pad. "I need my laptop, I need a secure connection, and I need whoever you have who can do forensic document analysis. Not photographic analysis, actual paper and ink analysis. I have a colleague at Northwestern who works in historical document forensics. She owes me a favor." "She'll need to come here," Damien said. "Fine. And she can't—" "I'll handle what she knows and doesn't know," Savannah said. "That is also my profession." She looked at him. "Call your people. Get me what I need. We have 72 hours. She had already opened her laptop before he reached for his phone. For 3 hours she worked. The house was quiet around her in the particular way of spaces where several people were doing several things that required concentration. Karev moved in and out. The driver appeared once with food she ate mechanically without tasting. Damien was on the phone in the back room for long stretches, his voice inaudible through the heavy door. But his presence felt, the specific quality of it, the way certain rooms feel occupied even when the person in them is not visible. Her colleague from Northwestern, a woman named Dr. Patricia Fenner, who had been doing historical document forensics for 20 years and had the specific sharp quality of someone who had spent decades being the last word on authenticity in rooms full of people who did not want to hear what she said, arrived at 2:15 with a field kit and the expression of someone who had agreed to an unusual favor and was reserving judgment. "You look terrible," Patricia said when she saw Savannah. "Sit down," Savannah said. "I need to show you something." She walked Patricia through the fabricated documents. She did it in the order she would have done it for a peer review. Methodical, precise, building from the foundational elements to the specific anomalies. Patricia looked at each page with the particular close attention of a specialist, moving a loop over the photographed documents, typing notes rapidly on her own laptop, asking questions in the clipped shorthand of someone who needed specifics, not narrative. At the 14th document, Patricia stopped. "This notarization," she said. "The dating sequence," Savannah said. "It matches the sequence you described in your 2021 paper precisely." Patricia looked up. "Too precisely." "Look at this," Savannah said, and slid one of her legal pads across the table. She pointed to a section of notes dated 8 months ago. A chain of title analysis that had never been published, that existed only in this legal pad and in a locked digital file on her work computer. Parcel 14B, the revised boundary description in my unpublished notes. Patricia looked at the legal pad, looked at the document photograph, looked back. "It's the same," she said. Her voice had gone flat, with the specific flatness of a scientist confronting a result that is unambiguous. "The boundary description in this document matches your unpublished notation exactly, down to the surveying notation format you used." "Which I developed myself," Savannah said. "It's not a standard format. I created it for this research." Patricia sat back in her chair, put down the loop. "Someone gave them your notes." "Yes." "Savannah." Patricia's voice had the quality of a person who understood the full dimension of something and was deciding how much of that dimension to put into words. If these documents were fabricated using your unpublished research and you publish them in any form, if they become part of any legal or academic proceeding, I know, Savannah said. The fabrication will be attributed to you. You had the most specific knowledge of what these documents would need to say. You are the only person outside the Langford organization who could have... She stopped. They're going to say you built them. I know. The house was quiet around them. November afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle, the specific flat light of a Midwest winter afternoon that illuminated everything without warming anything. What do you need from me? Patricia said. I need a forensic certification of the fabrication, documented, signed, with your methodology fully laid out. I need it to establish definitively that these documents were created recently using information from my non-public research materials, which means I couldn't have built them, because they were built to frame me, not by me, and the specific elements derived from my unpublished notes are the proof of that. The fabrication proves the conspiracy. She paused. Will you do it? Patricia looked at her for a moment. Who are you working with here, Savannah? People who want the same outcome I want. That's not... Patricia, Savannah's voice was level. I've been working this research for 3 years in good faith inside an institution that was feeding my work to the family I was investigating. The archive I've given 7 years of my career to was used as a surveillance mechanism against me. My supervisor has been on the Langford payroll the entire time. She paused. I'm not asking you to do anything except document what the evidence says. That is what we both do. What the evidence says is unambiguous. Patricia looked at her for a long moment. I'll need 48 hours to do it properly, she said. You have 36, Savannah said. Patricia opened her field kit. It was 6:45 in the evening when Damien came out of the back room. He had been in there for the last hour, and the quality of his face when he emerged had something in it that Savannah recognized by now as the specific compression of a man who had received information he was still processing. He sat across from her at the table. Patricia was working at the far end with the photographs and her kit, absorbed and unreachable in the specific way of scientists in the middle of technical work. Enzo Romano, Damien said. She looked at him. Who is that? Victor Langford's other problem-solving resource, when the legal architecture isn't enough. He said it plainly, the same way he said everything. He sent Romano's people to the archive this morning, not just to find the files, to send a message about what happens to people who continue looking for them. Savannah absorbed this. Raymond is fine. My people were there. He paused. It changes the timeline. Romano operates on his own schedule and his own logic. When Langford uses him, it means Langford is past the point of trying to manage this quietly. So we have less than 36 hours. We may have less than that, yes. She looked at the table, at her files, at Patricia working methodically at the far end, at the cold coffee cup and the flat November light, and the specific, dense silence of a house that was being guarded by people she had met 2 days ago and was trusting because the alternative was worse. Damien, she said. He waited. The real documents, in the vault at the Lake Forest estate. She looked at him. You're going to tell me you have a way in. Something moved in his face. I'm working on it. That means you have something. It means I have someone who may have access I haven't been able to use yet, he said carefully, because using it required a specific reason, a reason that would justify what the use of it would cost. And now you have the reason. Now I have the reason, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The January lake eyes, the particular quality of his stillness that she had been learning the grammar of for 3 days and still could not entirely read. The cost, she said. What is it? He looked at her steadily. Someone who has been inside the Langford organization for 3 years, he said. Someone who has maintained that position at significant personal risk. If I use them now, if they access the vault, get us the originals, their cover is blown, permanently. He paused. There's no going back for them after that. And they have people, a family. She sat with this. The weight of it. The specific human weight of a decision that had a face behind it and people behind that face. Does this person know you're considering it? She said. Yes. What do they say? Damien looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. They say it depends on whether the woman who's going to use the documents can actually do something with them, or whether we're trading their safety for nothing. Savannah felt the full specific gravity of what he had just put in front of her, the architecture of it. A person's safety on one side of a scale, 3 years of research and a 72-hour window, and a fabricated evidence trap in a vault in Lake Forest on the other. And somewhere underneath all of it, beneath the legal pads and the chain of title analysis, and the forensic photographs, and the cold coffee, and the flat November light, something true. Something that had been true since 1893, and had been buried and managed and legally insulated and institutionally suppressed for 130 years, and was still. She said yes. She didn't say it with drama, and she didn't say it with the particular performance of someone making a noble choice in a difficult moment. She said it the way she said most things that mattered, flatly, with the specific weight of a person who has examined the dimensions of a decision and arrived at a conclusion she intends to hold. "Tell your person to go in," she said. "I'll be ready." Damien looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he picked up his phone. The call lasted 45 seconds. He said 4 sentences in a language she didn't speak. Russian, she thought, or something close to it, and listened and said one more sentence and ended the call. He set the phone on the table. "Tonight," he said, "the estate staff has a shift change at midnight. There's a 40-minute window." "I need Patricia's certification before I can do anything with the originals," Savannah said. "If I publish the real documents without the forensic certification establishing that the fabricated set was planted, Langford's legal team buries the real ones by pointing to the fabricated set and arguing I'm attempting to cover a fraud with a second fraud." Patricia. Dr. Fenner looked up from her field kit with the expression of a woman who had been listening to everything while appearing to listen to nothing. "I can have a preliminary certification in 6 hours, full documentation in 24. 6 hours gets us to midnight," Savannah said. "Then you have a preliminary certification at midnight," Patricia said, and went back to work. Damien stood, moved to the window. Outside the Lincoln Square street had gone dark, and the streetlights were doing what Chicago streetlights did in November, casting a light that was technically sufficient and practically bleak. He stood there with his hands in his coat pockets and his back to the room and the specific stillness of a man who was running multiple things simultaneously in his head and had learned to do it without visible evidence. Savannah watched him. She was learning the grammar of his stillness in the way she learned the grammar of historical documents, not by being told what they meant, but by reading them repeatedly until the meaning surfaced. He was afraid. Not in the way she had been afraid in the loading dock, the specific animal fear of immediate physical danger, something older and more structural. The fear of a man who had been controlling variables for 20 years and had introduced one he couldn't fully control and had done it deliberately and was now living with the specific cost of deliberate choices. She looked back at her notes. She had work to do. The 6 hours had a texture she would remember later. Patricia worked with the dense, unhurried focus of genuine expertise. The loop, the chemical test strips from her kit, the notation system she'd been developing for 20 years that was faster and more precise than anything standardized. She narrated nothing. She produced pages of documentation in her small, exact handwriting and photographed each page with a timestamp on her phone and compiled it into a folder she labeled with a case number and the date. Savannah built the comparison document. It was the most precise thing she had ever written, a line-by-line analysis of the 17 elements in the fabricated documents that corresponded to non-public elements of her unpublished research, each one cross-referenced to a dated entry in her legal pads, each one demonstrating that the fabrication had required access to information that was never made public. It was, functionally, a criminal case. Laid out in the language of historical scholarship, with the specific, airless precision that the discipline required, it was a document that said, "Someone stole this research and used it to build a trap, and here's the proof, and here's what the trap was meant to bury." She finished it at 11:47. Damien's phone buzzed at 11:52. He read the message. "They're in." The next 40 minutes were the particular specific variety of unbearable that came from having nothing to do but wait for someone else to take a risk you had authorized. Savannah sat at the table with her completed document and Patricia's preliminary certification and her hands flat on the surface and her breathing counted and measured, and she thought about the person inside the Langford estate at midnight in November, and the 40-minute window, and the vault with the biometric lock and the 2-key authorization. She did not think about what happened if the window closed before they were out. At 12:29, Damien's phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen. His face did the thing, the specific flat resolution. He looked up. "We have them." Patricia let out a breath she'd apparently been holding for 40 minutes. Savannah closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and said, "Send me the images." The files came through in the next 6 minutes. 47 photographs. She opened the first one, and her screen filled with the image of an 1892 survey document, original paper, Harlan Langford's signature at the bottom. And the signature had the looping H, the authenticated H, the one that matched every confirmed example she had in her reference files. It was real. The forgeries had been good enough to fool a casual inspection. They had not been good enough to fool someone who had spent 3 years studying this specific signature in this specific period of this specific man's life. The real documents were exactly what she had believed they were. The foundational evidence of a fraud that had shaped 130 years of property law in the South Side of Chicago. A fraud that Victor Langford's family had maintained and profited from and legally fortified across 4 generations. She was still working through the photographs, cataloging, cross-referencing, building the evidentiary chain, when Damien's phone rang. Not a text. A call. He looked at the screen. Something moved in his face that she didn't have a category for yet. "Romano," Karev said from the window. He had reappeared at some point in the last hour without Savannah noticing, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he moved through spaces. Damien answered. He said nothing for the first 15 seconds. He listened with the phone against his ear and his face doing nothing, which was its own kind of communication. Then he said very quietly, "Say that again." Another pause. "Where?" He ended the call. He turned to Karev, 3 words, low and fast. Karev moved immediately, out of the room, phone already at his ear. Savannah looked at Damien. "What?" "They have someone," he said. The cold that moved through her was specific and immediate. "Who?" "The person who went into the estate." He said it without inflection, and the absence of inflection was its own thing, its own statement about what it cost him to say it without inflection. They didn't make the full window. Romano's people were already at the estate. Not the regular security. Romano's. Langford called him the moment he knew you'd taken your files from the archive. Savannah put both hands flat on the table. "Are they alive?" "Yes." He said it immediately, which meant he was certain, which meant he had information she hadn't seen move. "Romano wants an exchange, the documents we pulled from the estate, and everything you have. All of it, the research, the comparison document, Patricia's certification." He paused. "In exchange for the person." Patricia had gone very still at the far end of the table. Savannah looked at Damien. "He's asking us to destroy the evidence." "Yes." "And you said—" "I said I'd call back in 30 minutes. She looked at the screen full of photographs. At 47 images of documents that were true. At 3 years of work and 1 night of risk, and a person currently held somewhere by people who worked for Enzo Romano, which was a specific and fully documented variety of dangerous. "Tell me about this person," she said. Damien looked at her. "Tell me," she said. He sat down. It was the first time she had seen him sit in the last 6 hours, and the sitting had a quality of something releasing, not collapse, but the specific controlled release of a man who had been holding something at a specific tension for a specific amount of time and had made a decision about setting it down. "Her name is Nadia," he said. "She's 38. She went into the Langford organization 3 years ago. Property management, legitimate employment, moved up to estate management level within 18 months because she's exceptionally competent. She has a daughter, 9 years old. Her daughter's with a woman I trust in a location that Romano doesn't have." "She knew this was the risk," Savannah said. "She knew this was a risk. She chose it." He paused. "She's been inside for 3 years because she lost someone to one of Romano's operations. She wanted to be useful. That was the word she used. Useful." The room held this. Savannah looked at the documents. She looked at the photographs and the legal pads in Patricia's certification folder and the comparison document she had spent 6 hours building into the most precise thing she had ever written. She thought about Nadia, whom she had never met, who was 38 and exceptionally competent and had a 9-year-old daughter, and had spent 3 years inside something difficult because she wanted to be useful. She thought about Marcus Elroy and his careful blankness and his 6 years of foundation board meetings. She thought about Bryce Calloway and 4 feet of deliberate distance in one sentence. She thought about the specific cold of the freight elevator and the sound through the fire door in the loading dock and the emerald dress still hanging in the back of her Wicker Park closet. She thought about what it meant to spend 3 years building something true and have it used against you by the people it was built to expose. "How long until the city council vote?" she said. 19 hours, Damien said. "If we give Romano what he's asking for, Langford wins the vote. The development is his. The fraud is bulletproofed for another generation," he said it plainly. "And Romano returns Nadia and we rebuild from nothing. Or," he looked at her, "or," she said, "we don't give him what he's asking for. We use the 19 hours. We go public with everything. The real documents, the comparison analysis, Patricia's certification, the documented evidence of Elroy's collaboration before the vote. We make it impossible for the council to proceed." She paused. "And we find Nadia another way. Going public in 19 hours means the information is in front of journalists and city officials who will spend those 19 hours trying to verify it, being pressured by Langford's legal team not to run it, being told it's fabricated, being shown the fabricated document set as counter-evidence. 19 hours is not enough time for a news cycle to do what we need it to do." "Not through journalists," she said. "Through the city record." He looked at her. "The municipal archive maintains a public submissions protocol," she said. "Any citizen can submit historical documentation for the public record. Once submitted, the documents are part of the official city archive and cannot be suppressed by private legal action. The submission is time-stamped and immediately cataloged." She paused. "If I submit the real documents, all of them, with the full analysis, to the public record before the council vote, Langford can't bury them. He can contest them. He can argue they're fabricated. But they're in the public record. They exist. They can be reviewed and verified by anyone. And the council members who vote on that development in 19 hours do so with the public record showing that the foundational title to the land is contested on the basis of documented fraud." "Raymond," Damien said. "Raymond has been at the archive for 11 years, she said. "He's not Elroy. He's not on any foundation board. He's a man who has done a crossword puzzle at that desk for 11 years and protected my access tonight when he didn't have to." She paused. "I need to get into the archive. Romano's people are watching the archive." "I know. Savannah, I know," she said again. Her voice was level. "Tell me what you have." What followed was 30 minutes of the most specific and functional conversation she had ever had. Karev came back in, the driver. A third person she hadn't seen before, a woman in her 40s with the same quality of dense, low center of gravity competence, who was introduced as Mira and said nothing beyond what was necessary. They built a plan the way she built historical arguments, from the specific to the general, from the known to the inferred, with contingencies documented and risks categorized. She was not a person who had ever built this variety of plan before, and she found that the skills transferred more directly than she would have expected. Historical analysis was the discipline of assembling fragmentary evidence under conditions of uncertainty into a coherent argument that could withstand challenge. This was the same thing with different stakes. At 1:45 a.m., they moved. 2 cars. Savannah in the first with Damien and Mira. Karev and the driver in the second, different route, arriving at the archive's east side loading dock. Her loading dock, the one she had fled through 12 hours ago. 4 minutes ahead of them. The city at this hour had a specific quality. The particular empty clarity of a major city between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., when the last bars have thinned and the first deliveries haven't started, when the streets belonged to the people who worked them and the people who had nowhere else to be. Cold and clean and very still. She had the documents on an encrypted drive that Karev had produced from somewhere. All 47 photographs in her analysis and Patricia's certification compiled and formatted for archival submission. She had a backup on her phone. She had a third copy on Patricia's laptop, which was currently in a location that was not the Lincoln Square house. She was not going to lose this. The car stopped a block east of the archive. Damien looked at her. "The submission terminal is on the 2nd floor, she said. "Staff access. I have my credentials." "If they've revoked your credentials, Then Raymond lets me in manually. He has override authority. She paused. I know this building. I know every way in and out of it. This is my building. Something moved in his face. Not the suggestion of a smile. Something less performed than that. I'll be outside, he said. I know. She got out of the car. The cold was immediate and specific. The November 2 a.m. cold that was different from the November 7 p.m. cold she'd been moving through for 2 days. Starker, with less ambient warmth to blur its edges. She walked toward the archive with her encrypted drive in her coat pocket, and her hand around it and her breath making small clouds in the empty air. The East Side service entrance was the one she'd used this morning. She tried her key card. It worked. She went in. The building at this hour was a different thing from the building in daylight. The lobby lights were on low, the kind of low that was about security presence rather than visibility. The elevator hummed when she called it. She rode to the second floor and the doors opened on a hallway she had walked 1,000 times, lined with the gray metal doors of administrative offices that were locked and dark. The public submissions terminal was at the end of the hallway, a dedicated workstation behind a glass partition, available during archive hours for citizen document submissions, and available by staff override at any hour for time-sensitive historical submissions. She had used it twice in 7 years. Once for a probate collection that had been donated on short notice and needed to be logged immediately for estate purposes. Once for a set of photographs that a family was submitting before a legal deadline. She sat down at the terminal, logged in with her staff credentials. The interface loaded. She inserted the encrypted drive. She was selecting the files, all 47 photographs, the analysis document, Patricia's certification, a cover submission form she had drafted in the car, when she heard footsteps in the hallway behind her. She didn't turn around immediately. She kept her hands on the keyboard and finished selecting the files and initiated the submission and watched the progress bar begin its movement across the screen. Then she turned around. Marcus Elroy was standing in the hallway outside the glass partition. He was wearing a coat over what looked like the clothes he'd been wearing earlier in the day, and his face had the specific quality she had identified this morning. The alarm, the calculation. But they had been joined now by something else, a third thing. Something that was neither alarm nor calculation, and that she needed 2 seconds to identify. Shame. Savannah, he said. Marcus, you need to stop that. He was looking at the terminal, at the progress bar. Whatever you're submitting is going to be in the public record in approximately 4 minutes, she said, unless the building loses power, which I wouldn't recommend, because a power interruption to the archive systems during an active submission triggers an automatic offsite backup to the State Historical Society's servers. This was not true. She had no idea if it was true, but she said it with the specific flat certainty of someone stating a fact, which was a skill she had developed over 34 years of being underestimated in rooms that expected her to be uncertain. Marcus looked at her. His hand was on the door of the glass partition. They told me it was protective, he said. The research management, the communications with the legal team. They said Langford's people said it was about protecting the institution from a legal exposure. That your research was pointing toward claims the archive couldn't support, that if you published and the claims were challenged, it would— Marcus. Her voice cut through his. Don't. He stopped. I don't want to hear why it made sense to you, she said. I genuinely don't. What you did, the specific thing you did, is that you sat in a position of institutional authority over my work for 6 years, and you used it to feed my research to the people I was building a case against. You did that. And whatever story you were told about why it was acceptable, she paused. I don't care. I have work to do. She turned back to the terminal. The progress bar was at 63%. Savannah. His voice had changed. The shame was still there, but something else had joined it, something lower and more urgent. Romano's people are in the building. She went very still. They came in through the loading dock, he said. I saw them on the security feed. I didn't know they were going to— He stopped. His voice was doing something that she identified after a moment as breaking, the specific cracking quality of a man who had made incremental decisions across 6 years and was now standing in a hallway at 2 a.m. watching those decisions arrive at their destination. I called Langford when I saw you come in tonight. I told him you were here. I didn't know Romano. How many? She said. 3. They went to the basement first. I don't know which way they... The stairwell door at the far end of the hallway opened. Two men, not building security. The specific quality she was learning to recognize, the movement, the center of gravity, the particular way that people who were prepared for specific kinds of situations moved through doorways. They saw her. The progress bar was at 79%. She turned back to the terminal, kept her hand on the keyboard. In her peripheral vision, the two men were moving down the hallway, and Marcus was stepping back, and the third man was probably taking the elevator or the other stairs, and the progress bar was at 83%, and she could hear footsteps on the industrial carpet, and her heart was doing something she didn't have a policy for because she had never had a policy for this. The glass partition door opened. A hand came down on her shoulder. She did not move her hand from the keyboard. 88%. Step away from the terminal. The voice was flat, accented, unhurried, the voice of someone who had done this before and did not find it complicated. She did not step away. Now! The hand tightened on her shoulder, grip becoming something other than direction, becoming the specific pressure of someone prepared to apply the next level if the current level didn't work. 92%. She heard the stairwell door at the near end of the hallway. Different footsteps. The quality she'd been learning. Faster, more specific. The footsteps of people moving toward rather than away. The hand on her shoulder yanked. She grabbed the terminal desk with her free hand and held. 95%. Something happened in the hallway that was loud and fast. And she didn't look because she was looking at the screen and the progress bar, and her own hand white-knuckled on the edge of the desk, and her shoulder was going to separate from the force on it. She could feel the specific tearing pressure of it building toward a threshold. 98%. The hand released. Not because she'd pulled free. Because the person attached to the hand was no longer focused on her. The hallway was a specific kind of chaos. The compressed, purposeful chaos of people who were trained for it moving through a space too narrow for the number of bodies currently occupying it. She heard impact. Heard something that was a piece of furniture or a body meeting a wall. Heard a voice, not in English. She looked at the screen. 100%. Submission complete. Timestamp. 2:14:33. Reference number CHI-AR. CH-2-024-11-1-8-0892. She put both hands flat on the desk. The breath that came out of her was not a controlled breath. It was not in for 4, out for 6. It was the breath of a person who had been holding something for a very long time and had just put it down. The hallway was quieting, the specific, controlled quiet of an aftermath. She turned around. Mira was there, and two of Damien's people she didn't have names for. The three men from Romano had been dealt with in the specific, efficient way that she was learning was the characteristic approach of people who worked for Damien Voss. Not more force than necessary, but without hesitation about necessary force. And the result was 3 men on the floor in varying states of consciousness, and none of the people she cared about visibly damaged. Marcus Elroy was standing at the far end of the hallway with his back against the wall, and his face the color of a man who had called in a location and watched what arrived because of it. Damien was in the stairwell doorway. He looked at her hand still on the desk, at the screen. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. He came down the hallway, stopped in front of her, looked at her face with that complete cataloging attention, the specific attention of a man checking a specific thing. "Your shoulder," he said. "It's fine." "It's not fine." "It will be fine," she said. "We have..." She checked the time on the terminal. 16 hours and 43 minutes until the council vote. "The submission is in the public record," he said. "Langford's legal team will be notified the moment the archive opens at 8 a.m. "Which gives them 8 hours to file for suppression before the vote," she said. "Which is 8 hours of public record that every alderman on the council can be made aware of. Which is 8 hours for Patricia's certification to circulate, because she is going to circulate it to every academic contact she has in this city, because that is who she is." Damien looked at her. "And Nadia," she said. "Romano wanted an exchange. He doesn't have leverage anymore. The documents are public. But you still need to get her out." She looked at him. "What do you have?" He was quiet for a moment. "An address," he said. "And 4 people." and the specific fact that Romano's 3 best people are currently on the floor of the municipal archive. Then go, she said. He didn't move immediately. He stood there in the hallway of the archive she had worked in for 7 years and looked at her with those gray eyes, and she had the specific, unfamiliar sensation of being looked at by someone who was not evaluating her, not managing her, not deciding what she was worth, or whether she fit a category, or whether she was something to be seen in a specific room. Just looking. "When this is over," he said. "When this is over," she agreed. He turned. Mira and the 2 others followed him. The stairwell door closed. She stood in the hallway with 3 unconscious men and 1 destroyed man in the particular silence of a building that had just been through something and was now returning to its ambient self. The hum of the climate control, the low security lighting, the specific archival smell of old paper and preservation chemicals, and the long patience of documents waiting to be read. She turned back to the terminal, printed the submission confirmation, folded it, put it in her coat pocket alongside the encrypted drive. She looked down the hallway at Marcus Elroy. He was still standing against the wall. The shame on his face had not changed. It had, if anything, deepened into something that was past shame. Something that was the specific expression of a person seeing the final shape of decisions they made a long time ago. "Go home, Marcus," she said. He looked at her. "Savannah, go home," she said. "And in the morning, call the union, call the institutional review board, call whoever you need to call. Because what happens next—" She paused. "I'd rather you be on the right side of it. Not for my sake. For your own." She turned and walked to the elevator. 16 hours and 41 minutes. Somewhere in this city, in a location she didn't know, a woman named Nadia was waiting. And somewhere in the offices of Victor Langford's very expensive legal team, a phone was about to ring with news that the phone rang in Victor Langford's home office at 2:27 in the morning. He answered it on the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant he had been waiting. The voice on the other end was his lead counsel, a woman named Harriet Combe, who had been managing the Langford family's legal exposure for 19 years and had the specific, contained quality of someone who delivered bad news without apology, because apology implied surprise. And she had trained herself out of surprise a long time ago. She told him about the archive submission. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the few disciplines he had maintained across a life that had otherwise grown soft with the particular softness of a man who had never genuinely lost anything. He listened, and when she finished, he asked 2 questions: the reference number and whether it could be challenged before 8 a.m. And she answered both, and he sat in the specific silence of a man arriving at the end of a calculation he had been running for 2 years, and finding the result was not what the calculation had promised. "Get me in front of a judge at 7 a.m., he said. "I can do that," Harriet said. "But Damien Voss, what about him?" "If he has what the submission suggests he has, the original documents, authenticated, a suppression order on the archive submission doesn't bury the evidence. It buries one instance of it. He'll have copies." Langford was quiet for a moment. "Romano will handle Voss." There was a pause on Harriet's end that had a specific quality. The quality of a very competent person deciding how to tell a client something he did not want to hear. "Romano's people at the archive. I know about the archive. 3 of them are in police custody as of 40 minutes ago. The archive's security system recorded the incursion." Another pause. "Enzo Romano is going to be managing his own problems by morning." The silence that followed was longer. Outside the Lake Forest estate, the November night was completely still, the lake invisible in the dark, but present in the specific quality of the cold air, the faint mineral smell of deep water. "Do what you can with the judge," Langford said, "and get me everything we have on Savannah Reed, published, unpublished, institutional record, personal, everything, by 6 a.m. He ended the call. He sat in his office among the specific artifacts of a life built on inheritance, the furniture, the artwork, the shelves of leather-bound volumes that had been bought by the yard by his grandfather's decorator, the framed photographs of 4 generations of Langford men at the same desk in the same room. And he looked at the wall where the door to the private archive was located, behind a panel of bookshelves that swung on a concealed hinge, and he thought about what was in the vault behind that door. Then he picked up his phone and called Romano directly. Romano didn't answer. He called again. The third call went to a generic voicemail. Langford put the phone down. sat with the specific quality of a man who had just discovered that one of his load-bearing walls had a structural problem he hadn't assessed. He was still sitting there at 3:15 a.m. when headlights swept across the window. A car coming up the estate's private drive, which was gated and should have been inaccessible. And then the specific sound of a car door, and then, after a pause that lasted long enough for him to stand and move to the window, the sound of his front door. His security chief, a man named Tate, who had been with the family for 8 years, appeared in the office doorway. Tate had the expression of someone delivering a situation report while internally reassessing the accuracy of his prior situation reports. "Mr. Langford," Tate said, "there's someone at the front door. He says his name is Voss. He says he'll wait." Langford looked at his security chief for a moment. Then he looked at the concealed archive door. Then he looked back. "Let him in," he said. Damien Voss came into the office at 3:20 a.m. looking like a man who had been awake for 20 hours and intended to be awake for several more, and had made a specific peace with that fact. His coat was on. His tie was gone. His face had the quality that Savannah had been learning to read. The specific compression that was not tiredness, but was the thing underneath tiredness. The state a person arrived at when they had been operating past their reserves for long enough that the reserves had stopped being the relevant unit of measure. He sat down across from Langford without being invited. Langford sat down across from him. They looked at each other for a moment. Two men who had been operating on the same terrain for 3 years, usually through intermediaries, occasionally through legal filings, never in the same room. The specific evaluative quality of a first direct encounter between people who had built extensive models of each other and were now checking the model against the reality. "My people have Nadia Ostrova," Damien said. No preamble. "She's fine. Her daughter is fine." Langford's face registered nothing. "Romano is not going to be a resource for you going forward," Damien said. 3 of his people are in custody at the archive. The incursion was recorded on the building's security system. Romano is currently deciding whether to cooperate with the state's attorney in exchange for a reduced exposure. And my understanding of Romano's character suggests he will make that decision in the direction that is most immediately comfortable for Romano. "You're here to negotiate," Langford said. His voice had the quality of a man performing composure with slightly less infrastructure than the performance required. "No," Damien said. "I'm here to tell you what happens next, because I think you should hear it from me rather than from Harriet Combe at 7 a.m. after a judge declines to issue the suppression order." Langford looked at him. "The archive submission is in the public record," Damien said. "Patricia Fenner's forensic certification of the fabricated documents is currently in the inboxes of 6 academic contacts in Chicago, 2 at Northwestern, 1 at U of C, 3 at DePaul, and the editors of 2 journals. The certification establishes that the fabricated documents were constructed using non-public research materials, which establishes the collaboration between your organization and Marcus Elroy." He paused. "The City Council alderman on the Development Committee received an email at 3 a.m. with the archive submission reference number and a summary of the documented evidence. All 11 of them. I don't know how many of them are awake, but the email is there. The room was quiet." "The vote is in 15 hours, Damien said. "The development doesn't proceed. The title to the Southside parcels is contested on the basis of documented historical fraud. That contest doesn't resolve in your favor. Not with what's in the public record. Not with what Fenner's certification establishes. Not with Romano cooperating with the state's attorney." He paused one final time. "This is over, Victor." Langford looked at him for a long moment. His face was doing something that Damien watched without expression. The specific internal reckoning of a man whose model of his own invulnerability had just been revised in a direction that required significant structural adjustment. 4 generations, Langford said. He said it quietly, almost to himself. Not with anger, with something that was closer to bewilderment. The bewilderment of a man who had spent his entire life inside a specific architecture of power and was now standing in a room where the walls were still visible, but the load-bearing elements were no longer functioning. "Yes," Damien said. He said it without satisfaction, with the flat, specific quality of a statement of fact. He stood up, buttoned his coat, looked at Langford one more time. "Get ahead of it," he said. "That's the only advice I have. Whatever cooperation looks like for you, it's better than what doesn't cooperating looks like." He left. Savannah was in the black car outside the estate's front gate. She had refused to wait at the Lincoln Square house, which Damien had argued about for approximately 90 seconds before accepting that argument was not a productive use of the 90 seconds. She sat in the back of the car with her coat on and her hands in her lap and watched the gate through the window. When Damien came through it, she let out a breath. He got in. The driver pulled away without being told. "Nadia," she said. "Karev has her. She's at a hospital in Evanston, precautionary. She wasn't hurt." He paused. "Rattled, but not hurt." Savannah nodded. She looked out the window at the lake forest darkness, at the massive old trees along the road that had been growing here since before anyone living had been born, at the specific quality of a wealthy suburb at 3 in the morning, the deep quiet of a place accustomed to being insulated from the varieties of difficulty that kept other parts of the city awake. "He looked old," Damien said. "Langford. He looked old in a way he didn't look when this started." 3 years will do that," she said. "So will the end of something you built your life around." She looked at him. He was looking out his own window, at the same road, the same trees. His face and profile had the specific qualities she'd been accumulating observations about for 5 days. The particular arrangement of a person who had learned a long time ago to keep the things that mattered to him in a place that didn't show. "What happens to your development?" she said. "The Southside Project." He was quiet for a moment. Without Langford's political leverage routing the approvals, it proceeds on its merits, which are substantial. The development the city actually needs, as opposed to the one that served the Langford family's century-old property management interests. He paused. "It'll take time. Contested title is complicated, but the path is clear. And the fraud investigation. That's not mine to control anymore. The state's attorney has what they have. Romano's cooperation, if it materializes, covers the organized crime angle. The historical fraud, the 1893 documentation, that's in the hands of the institutions now. The archive, the courts, the academic community." He turned from the window and looked at her. "Your community." She sat with that. The specific particular texture of a thing she had been working toward for 3 years, arriving at a destination that was not the one she had imagined. More complicated, more costly, with more people's fingerprints on it, and more people's lives tangled in it than she had pictured when she was alone at her desk in the archive, working from copies. "I need to sleep," she said. "Yes, I need to sleep for approximately 14 hours, and then I need to write the full academic paper on the Langford survey fraud, with the original documents as the evidentiary foundation, and submit it to the Journal of Urban Historical Studies, and copy the Illinois Historical Society and the Chicago Bar Association's Ethics Review Board, and the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. All at once," he said. "All at once," she said, "while it's still moving, before the legal process slows it down and buries it in procedure." He looked at her with the complete attention. She had stopped finding it unnerving 3 days ago. She had started finding it in the specific way of things you didn't plan to find anything, a particular variety of steadying. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. She looked at him. "The night at the restaurant," he said. "Étoile Noire, Bryce Calloway." "What about it?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the strategic quiet, the other kind. The kind she'd seen once before, when she asked him what Romano's people meant for the timeline. The quiet of a man selecting precision. "I'd been told about the dinner," he said. "Not by Calloway, by someone who monitors his connections. Calloway has a relationship with a firm that does work for Langford Properties. Minor, contract work, nothing significant. But he was in a database I maintain of people with Langford adjacencies." He paused. "I knew he'd be at the restaurant that night. I knew who he was taking." Savannah looked at him. "I didn't arrange it," he said. "The dinner was real. Calloway's invitation to you was real. What he did was entirely his own. I didn't arrange any of that, but I knew about it. I knew you'd be there." He held her gaze steadily. "I was already going to be there. On my own business. But it was not entirely coincidence." The car moved through the dark. The highway had replaced the Lake Forest roads, the city coming back in on the horizon, the specific orange glow of Chicago at 4 a.m. She sat with what he had told her, examined it, turned it over in the specific careful way she turned over evidence, looking for what it said and what it didn't say and what the gap between them meant. You didn't sit down because of the research, she said. Not a question, working it out. I sat down because of what he did, he said. The research was, yes, I knew about the research, but that's not... He stopped. Reset. The rare, visible effort of a man who did not frequently attempt to say exactly what he meant about something that mattered. I sat down because he stood up. That's the true thing. The research was already there. What he did was separate. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. He looked at her. I know, she said again. I've known since the second hour of that dinner, not the specific facts, but the shape of it. She paused. You're not a person who does things for one reason. You're a person who does things for several reasons that happen to align. That's not the same as deception. That's just how you're built. Something moved in his face, something she didn't have a name for yet, something she thought she might eventually. I should have told you sooner, he said. Yes, she said. You should have. And I'm telling you I know, she said, which means you can stop calculating whether I'm going to be angry about it and direct your energy towards something more useful. The corner of his mouth moved, the suggestion that wasn't quite a smile that she had catalogued 3 times now. What would be more useful? Telling me where we're going, she said, because it's 4 a.m. and I don't think you're taking me back to Wicker Park. He looked out the window. The city was coming in fast now, the highway becoming the familiar grid. There's a place I have, he said, quieter than the Lincoln Square house. Actual beds. He paused. Separate rooms, he added, with the specific, almost formal precision of a man who had opinions about what was being implied and wanted to be accurate. She almost smiled. For the first time in 5 days, she almost smiled, and it felt like something she'd forgotten the mechanism of and was relearning. Okay, she said. The same word. Still doing different work every time. She slept for 11 hours. Not 14. She woke at 3 in the afternoon with the particular abrupt alertness of someone whose nervous system had been running at capacity for too long and had simply stopped rather than wound down. And she lay in the unfamiliar room with its high ceiling and good curtains and the specific quiet of a place that had been built for people who needed to be unreachable. And she stared at the ceiling and let the events of the last 5 days move through her in their proper sequence. At 4 p.m., she sat up and found her phone on the bedside table, which she had no memory of putting there, and turned it on. 47 messages. She did not read 47 messages. She read 3. One from Patricia, one from a number she didn't recognize, one from a name she hadn't expected. Patricia's said, "Full certification complete. Sent to all distribution points at 10 a.m. Journal editor called. They want the full paper in 30 days. Call me when you're human again." The unknown number said, "This is Nadia. Damien gave me your number. I wanted you to know I'm okay. My daughter is with me. Thank you for not giving Romano what he wanted. You didn't know me and you didn't give him what he wanted. I won't forget that." Savannah read the message twice, put the phone down, picked it back up. The third message was from Marcus Elroy. She held the phone for a moment, looked at his name on the screen, looked at the ceiling, then she opened it. It said, "I called the Institutional Review Board this morning and the state's attorney's office. I told them everything. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know." She set the phone on her knee, looked at the window where the November afternoon light was coming through the curtain's gap in a thin, flat line. She thought about Marcus Elroy and his crossword puzzle desk and his Langford Foundation board meetings and the specific incremental way a person arrived at complicity, not in a single choice, but in a series of small ones, each individually justifiable, accumulating toward something that was not. She did not forgive him. She wasn't in the forgiveness business today. But she thought about the message and felt the specific weight of a man trying to find the right direction at the end of something, and she filed it in the place she kept things that were true and complicated and not yet fully resolved. She got up, found his bathroom, found, to her surprise, that her overnight bag was there. Mira had apparently retrieved it from the Lincoln Square house with the same quiet efficiency with which Mira appeared to do everything. She showered, changed into clothes that had not been through the last 5 days. When she came downstairs, Damien was at the kitchen table with a laptop and a coffee that was hot. He looked up when she came in, took her in, The rested version, the changed clothes, the specific quality of a person who had come through something and was on the other side of it. Council vote, she said. Postponed, he said. 6 of the 11 aldermen requested a postponement pending review of the archive's submission. Langford's legal team filed for suppression at 7 a.m., and the judge declined to issue the order. He paused. The development is on hold pending title clarification, which will take months. But it's his development that's on hold, not mine. She sat down across from him. He pushed the coffee toward her. Romano, she said, cooperating. As of this morning, he had already given the state's attorney 2 years of documented collaboration with Langford's operation. He's saving himself, which is what Romano does. But the documentation he's providing is real. He paused. Langford retained a criminal defense attorney this morning, not Harriet Combe. A different firm. The kind of firm that specializes in a different category of problem. She drank the coffee. It was very good coffee. She noted this in the specific way of someone noticing small physical facts after a period of sustained intensity. The texture of the mug, the temperature, the specific quality of good coffee at 4 in the afternoon after 11 hours of sleep. The archive, she said, reopens tomorrow. Raymond is back at the desk. Marcus Elroy submitted his resignation this morning. He looked at her steadily. You'll need to decide what you want the institution to be going forward, what role, what the Langford collection access looks like, what the paper means for the archive's research agenda. That's not a 5-day decision, she said. No. It's a months-long conversation with the board and the staff and the institutional review process, and probably several attorneys. Yes. I'm going to need a better supervisor than Marcus Elroy. Something in his face shifted. I imagine you are. She looked at her coffee. At the kitchen, which was plain and functional and had the good bones of a place that had been built to last rather than to impress. At the window with its view of a garden that had been put to bed for winter, the specific brown dignity of dormant plants that would come back. Nadia sent me a message, she said. I know, I gave her your number. He paused. I should have asked first. No, she said. It was the right thing. He looked at her across the table. The morning's events and the night before and the 5 days preceding and all the specific weight they carried were present in the room between them, not as unresolved things but as resolved ones. The particular quality of a space after a storm has passed, when the structure is still standing and you are examining what held and what didn't. Your shoulder, he said. She had been not thinking about her shoulder for 14 hours, which had been reasonably successful as a strategy until the shower. Sore, she said. There's a doctor. I'll see my own doctor, she said. Tomorrow. He accepted this. He had, she noticed, learned in 5 days when she meant what she said in a way that foreclosed the conversation, which was either very fast learning or a function of the specific quality of attention he paid to people. She suspected both. What happens to you, she said. The non-legitimate parts of your operation. Romano's cooperation covers some of it. Some of it, he said. The state's attorney is interested in a different category of conversation with me. It's ongoing. He said it without evasion. I have attorneys, I have documentation of my own that is relevant. The full picture of what I've been doing in this city for 20 years is, he paused, complicated. Not all of it survives this. Some of it was already being restructured. This accelerates that. You're telling me you're not walking away clean. I'm not clean, he said. I've told you what I am. Some of what I am has costs that are arriving now. He looked at her steadily. I'm not going to prison. I want to be direct about that because I think you deserve directness. But the process of arriving at not going to prison involves several months of legal complexity and at least one very difficult conversation with the state's attorney's office. He paused. I wanted you to know. She looked at him, at the gray eyes and the tiredness that was underneath everything, and the particular quality of a man telling her something difficult in a plain way, because he had decided that plain was what the situation required. I know, she said. You keep saying that. Because you keep telling me things I've already worked out, she said. You're a man who does his own accounting. She paused. That's a quality I have some respect for. The corner of his mouth moved. Then more than the corner. It was the first time she had seen it actually become a smile. Incomplete. A little uneven, with the specific quality of a smile that hadn't been deployed in a while, and was therefore slightly unpracticed. It changed his face considerably. "I have a proposal," he said. She looked at him. "There's a building," he said, "in the South Loop, a historic mansion, 1897, originally built for a steel magnate, has been through 4 commercial uses and is currently empty. The structure is excellent. The interior has been stripped, but the bones—" He stopped. "It's the kind of building that should be doing something that matters." She looked at him. "I've been holding the property for 2 years," he said, "intending to do something with it. I didn't know what. I know now." He paused. "An independent historical foundation, not affiliated with the city archive, not connected to any existing institution, private, endowed, focused on the preservation and public access to exactly the category of historical record you've spent your career working on, the kind of records that tell the truth about how this city was actually built." Another pause. "With full academic independence. Research agenda determined by the scholars, not the donors." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're offering me a job," she said. "I'm offering you a building," he said, "and the endowment to fill it. What you do with those is your decision." She looked at her coffee, at the dormant garden, at the specific November light that was doing what November light did, falling flat and honest and without the particular warmth that made things look better than they were, revealing the actual shape of what it landed on. 3 years ago, she had been an archivist with a publishing record and an underfunded theory, and a supervisor who was managing her research on behalf of the family she was investigating. 5 days ago, she had been a woman in an emerald dress counting her breaths at a table in a room full of people pretending not to watch. She thought about the 1893 survey documents, about Harlan Langford's forged signature and the real one, about the specific irreducible fact of a thing that was true waiting in a vault for 130 years to be read correctly. She thought about the woman who had read it. "I'll need to see the building," she said. "Of course. And the endowment documents. Full transparency on the funding sources." "Yes. And I'll need to bring Patricia Fenner in. She'll be insufferable about the document conservation protocols, but she'll be right about them." "Understood. And the name," she said. "The foundation's name. It's not Voss anything." He looked at her. "No," he agreed. "It's not. I'll think about the name." "Take your time," he said. She drank her coffee. He went back to his laptop, or appeared to. She noticed that he was not actually reading what was on the screen, that his attention was elsewhere, that he was doing the thing she had first observed at a table in Étoile Noire and had been observing in one form or another for 5 days. Sitting in a space with the particular quality of a man who had gotten used to rooms belonging to him and had discovered, in a way he was still processing, that he preferred this room when it had someone else in it. She noticed this and did not comment on it. She looked at the window. The light was moving, the late afternoon doing its thing, the garden's dormant geometry becoming more visible as the shadows lengthened. She thought about the foundation and the building and the 1897 steel magnate's mansion in the South Loop with its excellent bones. She thought about what it meant to have the keys to a building that nobody was using for anything small. She thought about Nadia's message. "You didn't know me, and you didn't give him what he wanted." She had not known her. She had known only the shape of her, a woman, 38, a daughter, 3 years inside something difficult because she wanted to be useful, and the shape had been enough. The shape of a person who had made a choice at significant cost for reasons she believed in was enough. It had always been enough. And the specific failure of the world that had put a sentence like "someone like you" in her life for 34 years was not that it misread her body or her appearance or the specific variety of space she occupied. It was that it had tried to convince her that shape was insufficient, that you had to be a certain thing to deserve the room. She had never fully believed it. She had almost believed it sometimes. On the worst nights, in the particular cruelty of 2 a.m., she had almost believed it. But she had never gotten all the way there, and the distance between almost and actually was the distance she had been building across for 34 years, one careful step at a time, in good shoes and bad shoes, and once in an emerald dress in the most expensive restaurant in the city. She put the coffee mug down. "Damien," she said. He looked up. "The night at the restaurant," she said. "What you said." She paused. "I want you to know that I understood what you meant, not as a line, not as a calculation." She held his gaze. "I understood it." He looked at her for a moment. The gray eyes in the November afternoon light, all the specific weight of 5 days and 20 years, and 130 years, and one sentence in a room full of crystal chandeliers. "I know you did," he said. "That's why I said it." Outside, the garden held its winter shape. The light went on doing what light did, falling on everything equally, making no distinctions, illuminating the true shape of whatever it found. In the south loop, a building stood empty, with its 1897 bones waiting for someone to decide what it was for. In a hospital in Evanston, a woman named Nadia sat with her daughter and the particular exhausted relief of someone returned from a place they were not sure they'd return from. In a Lake Forest estate, a man sat with the final accounting of 4 generations of careful management and found the numbers did not balance. In a public archive, time-stamped at 2:14 a.m., a document existed that could not be unsubmitted, that was part of the city's permanent record, that said what it said with the flat, patient persistence of true things waiting to be read. And at a kitchen table in a quiet house in Chicago, 2 people who had found each other at the specific intersection of a calculated decision and an unplanned one, which was, perhaps, where most true things were found, sat with their coffee and their laptops and the remnants of a week that had cost them both something real, and were, for the first time in a long time, exactly where they had chosen to be. The city went on outside the window. It always did. It was built on difficult ground, and it knew it, and it went on anyway, which was the only true thing that had ever been said about it, and the only thing that had ever needed to be.